across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Well, hello, good morning to you. Happy Sunday. It's a nice bright day out there over London. I hope it's looking cheerful where you are and you have some wonderful, glorious plans for the, well, is it the last day of the week or the first day of the week? I never quite know. Because, of course, in the Bible, it's actually the first day. People don't realise that. So whatever you're doing today, I hope you thoroughly enjoy it and it puts you in a wonderful mood, ready to attack the days that are forthcoming. We have one heck of a show coming up. A great thing about presenting on a Sunday is you have all the Sunday newspapers, and that's where you get the political gossip, the analysis, the little exclusives that belong to the Sunday papers only. So it's kind of like a fresh news cycle. If you think you've been sort of banging the drum with the same old stories for a few days, a Sunday begins to usher in new narratives, and there's a lot for us to seek our teeth into. We're going to be discussing what I like to call the illegal immigration industrial complex, because every single time there's a new revelation as to what quite is going on, and now we find out that asylum seekers are using a so-called Bidoon loophole, which means they're turning around and saying, I happen to be from an undocumented tribe of Arabs who are not given citizenship in Kuwait, and that is why you must grant me asylum. Except they're being given the script for that by the actual people traffickers in documents being posted on sites such as Telegram. But this is not unique. We found out that there are 4 imams in Kuwait who are essentially signing off documents saying, yes, yes, I agree, this person is a Bidoon, in the same way that we found out the Taliban was selling letters to people, basically saying, you know, dear Mohammed, you're in trouble with us, love the Taliban, so they can then present it to immigration authorities. And of course, this muddies the waters when you're sitting there trying to analyse who needs refuge and who, quite frankly, is pulling our chain. There are all sorts of people out there gaming the system and making plenty of money from it. So what does Britain do to address that issue? Of course, the Sunday papers are filled as well with analysis and gossip and foreboding and doom and harbingers of chaos because the budget is coming up next week. And it seems to me one thing that the Labour Party have been doing, and it's not a new trick, it's done by lots of political parties, but they seem to be floating ideas of what might be in the budget in the media. They've been doing it for a number of weeks now to see what settles, what causes the backbenchers to kick up a fuss so there can be polling in newspapers. It's almost like doing a national focus group to figure out what they can get away with, essentially. And so that continues today. What might we see in the budget? It seems to me we're not going to see welfare cuts, and that, many would argue, is exactly the area that Labour need to focus on. But of course, the Labour Party finds itself in a bind, or perhaps it's Sir Keir Starmer who finds himself in a bind, because people might say, with the economy doing as badly as it is, with the bloated welfare state putting so much strain on the Treasury, perhaps the Labour Party don't actually have the right sort of medicine in their cabinet to cure the country's ills. And so when the Labour Party have to start trying to tack a little bit left, the backbenchers say, no, 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 we won't tolerate this. We need a change in leadership. And guess whose name is circulating once again? Well, it's Angela Rayner. People say she did the chicken run to move down to Hove in that new house scandal, because she could well lose her own seat. And if she wanted to be the next Prime Minister of this country, she better make sure she herself is elected. But it seems to me, people saying, well, Sir Keir Starmer's a disaster, let's have Angela Rayner as Prime Minister instead. To me, it's sort of going, well, Sir Keir Starmer doesn't have the right sort of medicine to cure the country's problems, so let's get on the palliative laughing gas. At least that's my interpretation. Then coming up, there is a topic which we don't really cover on this programme, but I must confess I'm a bit of a nerd. I love it. So we're going to depart from the normal current affairs, although in my mind it is current affairs, or at least should be, because we're going to be talking about what is called the UAP disclosures over in America. The what now? Some of you are asking. Well, if I said the word UFO, the acronym UFO, you'd know exactly what I mean. Aliens. Yes, she's lost her mind. Alex Phillips is going to be doing a segment on aliens. But hear me out. We have had, over the course of a number of years now in America, bipartisan congressional hearings with people declaring under oath that they have information on whether or not we are alone in this world. It's a massive topic in America. It doesn't ever seem to make the papers in the United Kingdom. Anyway, a big documentary landed on Amazon Prime yesterday. I had a little diary note. I had an alarm basically set up to watch it. It's called The Age of Disclosure. And it's got incredible contributors from Barack Obama to Marco Rubio and all sorts of whistleblowers from the US military and the CIA who are all saying we are not alone. And perhaps soon the president might turn around and confirm that. So we're going to be discussing that. I think it's a fantastic topic. So lots to stay tuned for today. But let's kick off the programme with a good old-fashioned left-wing, right-wing political fisticuffs. I'm joined by the brilliant Reem Ibrahim, Head of Media for the IEA, and Avni Majuria, Associate Director of Public Services for IPPR. Good morning, ladies.
Hi, good morning.
I hope you're having a lovely
all-women
Sunday.
show this morning.
I know, it's great, isn't it? Well, you know, we've got one of those already, by the way, called Talk Women. See, sneaky promo. Let's get into, first of all, what I'm calling the illegal immigration industrial complex. There's a piece in the Telegraph today talking about how some asylum seekers are posing as stateless Q80s to trick their way into Britain. Now, this is one of a number of devices that are used. We all know that there are people who may well be genuine asylum seekers, and there are those gaming the system. And so how do you sift the wheat from the chaff, if you will? How do you know when people are presenting documents or giving their interviews, if their passports have been thrown away, that they are who they say they are? Reem?
It's a very, very difficult question. I think one of the problems fundamentally is that a lot of the time they throw their documents away. A lot of the time we don't know where they are coming from, especially those that enter the country through illegal means. So via, whether it be small boats or indeed if they overstay their visa, it is very, very difficult for a particular individual to claim asylum when we don't know who they are. So to answer your question, it's one of those difficult things. We have to be able to interview them. We have to be able to assess who they are they who they say they are, and also if they pose a threat to us in the United Kingdom. But fundamentally the question is, are those people asylum seekers? Are they fleeing war? Or are those people actually economic migrants? And I would say many of those people that are currently entering the United Kingdom are economic migrants, which is a great thing. We want people to come to this country and work, but do it legally. I personally think that if anybody comes to the United Kingdom on a small boat, that is grounds for the complete removal, because fundamentally they've entered the United Kingdom via France, which is already a safe country. So I think that partly it's about the means of which they get here.
Now, Avni, there's a sliding scale of how compassionate people are. I put myself probably at the lower end, I must admit. But at the same time, you have to understand that we are part of various treaties, and some might say we have an obligation to look after people who are vulnerable. But we also know that there are people making countless amounts of money, engaging in the horrible industry of people trafficking, and that there are plenty of people out there willing to pay money for false documentation or to learn scripts which they believe will help them trick the system. And when you look at some of the statistics and some of the information in this article, and it's actually previously there was a Guardian article in 2024 which sort of echoed what's being spoken about in the Telegraph. You have to raise the question, well, we know that people are blagging their way into the country and we're paying for them to stay in hotels. So what can we do?
Well, let's call this out for what it is to start with. And Alex, thank you for having me on the show.
Oh, lovely to have you, Abby. The first time we've actually met. So great to have a new friend.
Fantastic. So let's call this out for what it is. In the first instance, I think that there are stories about the scale of illegal entrance to this country and asylum seekers that are overrated. And so, for example, if you take the amount of asylum seekers that this country takes versus France, versus Germany, yes, you're right, there are some asylum seekers coming over from France, but in fact, a lot more are staying in France. And I think that's a really, really important point when we think about narratives around why are they going to France and then coming here. If you think about the scale overall of the numbers that we take, we're fifth. If you adjust that for the population size, we are 16th in Europe for the numbers of asylum seekers arriving here in this country.
So do you therefore we should be taking more on that premise?
I don't think that we should be taking more, but I think that there are fears that people have around the scale of migrants entering this country that are unfounded when you look at the comparisons.
I don't think anybody is denying that other countries take more than we do. Just to say, I don't think anybody is saying that, you know, it is the fact that France take less than we do. I think most people are aware of the fact that many European countries, because they are just generally closer to those countries, take more asylum seekers than us. What people are saying is they are afraid of people where we don't know who they are or where they come from.
The crux of this story actually is, are these people asylum seekers, right? That is at the crux of this, because they're using false information to say that they are, and there's a high chance that some of these people are just young men who fancy coming and working over in Britain or getting a hotel, whatever it may be, whatever the myriad reasons that people decide they're going to up sticks and come here. There's a fair chunk of them which is not because they're fleeing war and persecution.
And I think that the way of dealing with that is getting hold of our processing system, our understanding and our kind of processing of the claims. We've got a backlog that has built up over years because of the Conservative government's failure to have a proper processing system with the right resourcing, with the right processes. And then we've got an appeals process that again, 70% of applicants pass. And so this is not about kind of understanding who those people are at the border and sending them back. There's no way of doing that. What you really need to do is get that control, which doesn't exist at the moment and hasn't existed for many, many years, into the system around processing claims. That will mean that people can legitimately work in this country, can contribute to our tax receipts when they do receive asylum. It will mean people like my parents, I'm the son of immigrants that came over from Uganda in 1972. People like my parents, my dad's a social worker, my mum's a teaching assistant, and they have contributed to this country, and this country is built off the backs of people like my parents can contribute.
But arguably, I mean, that's a very interesting thing that you talk about there, because we know what happened in Uganda. Horrible. And also there was, of course, the hand of the British Empire when it came to largely Gujaratis being in Uganda, and then Idi Amin turning around and becoming a monster, essentially.
It's forced migration.
And we had a great policy there, as we have done with Ukraine, as we did with Hong Kong, to say, right, we have we have a responsibility.
But you know what the difference here is?
Right.
Those people are working. Your parents came to work. My grandparents came from North Africa. They came to work. They came to contribute. Unfortunately, I actually think that, yes, the asylum system as a whole...
they couldn't work for a significant amount of time because of the way that the system was working,
and actually,
which is how it works now.
Exactly, and I would remove that. I would say that if you have come to this country and you are on the asylum seeker backlog, you should be allowed to work. You shouldn't be forced to be on the taxpayer dollar.
Some people might say that would be a pull factor, though.
I would like to see people come to this country and work and contribute. I would actually completely remove all benefits for migrants. I think if you come to this country...
What, the £9.95 a week that they get?
Yeah, remove it all. No hotels, no free driving lessons, absolutely nothing.
The flea-infested hotels with cockroaches.
And indeed, let them work and be able to actually afford decent housing. I'm sorry, but I think the fundamental problem here is that British taxpayers are paying for migration. I don't want
£9.95 a week.
I don't want a single penny of taxpayer money being spent on migrants, but I want them to be able to come and work freely. I'm very pro-immigration. I just want them to be able to sustain themselves financially.
We could end up talking about this topic a very long time and going down all sorts of avenues, but we will move on. Yeah. We will move on, because we could start talking about whether, you know, leftist lawyers are campaigning and not doing the things that they should be doing. We could talk about whether certain things are pull factors, whether people should be in hotels. You know, there are various different strands to this debate.
I'm fine with it being a pull factor, by the way.
By the way, on that pull factor, there is a study conducted by the University of Warwick that took in 30 different left and right reports on this, and there is absolutely no evidence that being able to access the labour market is one of the major pull factors on illegal immigration.
I want the UK to be rich. I want this country to be rich and wealthy and successful. Look at countries like Dubai. Brits go to Dubai, well, cities like Dubai. People go to Dubai all the time. Brits go to Dubai all the time. They don't speak a word of Arabic. They don't integrate into UAE culture, but they are only having to sustain themselves. They will never be UAE citizens. And they will never be able to
look at countries like Spain that have very high levels of immigration, grant lots of asylum seeker status, and have the biggest growth in Europe at the moment. And that is because they're using immigration and those people paying tax receipts.
From Spaniards who are saying we don't recognise our communities anymore. So there's a flip side to this.
Of course
there's a huge flip side to a radically changing demography in the United Kingdom. And actually, Shabana Mahmood said it herself.
Radically changing, because if you actually look at the scale of what we're accepting, it isn't what you perceive from the television.
Shabana Mahmood is worried that she says she believes there's an uptick in racism in this country because Brits are becoming increasingly worried about the changing nature of their neighbourhoods. And those demographic changes can be easily evidenced. You look at the change of the population in Birmingham, you look at the change of populations in former industrial towns in the north, and it is undeniable. And so bigger social questions to be answered. We're going to take a short break now, because like I said, we could go on about this one topic in a great amount of depth, but we are going to move on after the break to talk about various ways of approaching the pretty paltry state of our economy. And so both of you ladies, IPPR, IEA, you're the brain boxes on this one. So you've got about 1 minute 30 to come up with your best arguments. And we'll be catching up again just after this.
Big news coming this December. Our talkTV app is moving to the Talk app. You can watch, catch up and listen to all your favourite shows and podcasts anytime, anywhere, all on the Talk app. From Monday, 1st of December, the talkTV app will no longer exist, so don't miss out. So head over to your App Store or Google Play and search Talk now.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello and welcome back. Now, I remember the musical chairs of the Conservative Party with the constant leadership competitions, Sir Graham Brady being wheeled out of the stationery cupboard to count envelopes once again, the fact that it was all about faction fighting and party politics and not policy production, which really stymied the Conservative Party, saw their ratings plummet, and, well, we all know where they are right now, in the doldrums. the Labour Party seem to be making the same mistakes, because while they're polling in, well, certain polls is not exactly looking particularly toasty, on some polls, actually, they're breaking even with the blimmin' Green Party, for crying out loud. The same sort of leadership discussions are happening, and some people might say, well, it's all the media confecting these stories, and yes, they do that. But backbenchers and people who might have lost their positions are also there, aren't they? Wargaming their own possible futures. And so now, in the Sunday papers, it is being suggested that Sir Keir Starmer might quit in the new year. Some people are saying that he's got a new Zen-like aura about him. For a man that's under so much pressure, for the polling that's looking so woeful, for Angela Rayner straining at the leash to come back into politics from her new headquarters in Hove, for Wes Streeting potentially whispering in corridors of power that he should be the next person, or perhaps Shabana Mahmood. Sir Keir Starmer looks like a man very much at ease with himself, perhaps because he's thinking, do you know what, I can't be bothered with this. I'm just going to get past Christmas and then I'm going to take a nice early retirement on a Prime Minister's pension. If that is the case, Avni, if Sir Keir Starmer is already planning his sort of valedictorian speech, who might succeed him? And do we want this to happen? Do we want to see a change at the top of the Labour Party, or is it chaos on top of chaos?
I think there's a sad state of affairs in this country where people have lost faith altogether in politics. You can see that through the diversification of the way that people are looking at alternative parties, the Green Party, Reform, parties on all sides. And I think Keir Starmer and faith in Starmer perhaps has been a casualty of that bifurcation. But you know, all in all, what do I think should happen next? In some way or another, establishment parties need to regain the faith of the people, help people to understand that they can work on their sides and do things for them, and that we get some of the semblance of our democracy back. And so I won't answer your specific question on who I think should succeed.
But that's not allowed, I make up the rules in this studio.
But what I will say
Come
is,
on,
whoever it is
Right.
needs to be able to, and you know, that could be Starmer, but needs to be able to regain the faith of the British people, because some of your viewers may very well back this, but I believe that reform is at the door, and that would be a bad thing for this country.
Now, let's look at the Labour runners and riders. If it is to happen, if the whispers in the corridors of power are true, at the moment, according to polls of Labour Party members, it would seem like Angela Rayner would be a shoo-in, which I must admit personally, and this is an opinion-based channel, so I get to throw my 2-bit into the mix. What a joke that would be. I mean, for crying out loud, I already miss Rishi Sunak. We switch out Sir Keir Starmer with Angela Rayner and I'll be the one going to his front door begging for him to come back.
Well, I think to Avni's
God forbid.
I think to Avni's point, establishment parties can sod off, quite frankly. I think that they've had too much time in power. They have fundamentally changed the way that this country looks, the way that this country feels. People are economically worse off now, partly as a result of the Conservative government, and the Labour Party took it over and just made things worse. So I think that both of the establishment parties are, quite frankly, well, all of the parties and every single politician, I think, has failed this country.
I mean, what's interesting, actually, because you're talking about this bifurcation going on in politics. This is not unique to Britain. We're seeing this happen in France. We're seeing this happen in Italy. We're seeing this happen in Scandinavia. We're seeing this happen. I mean, even though in America you've still got a 2-party electoral system,
don't forget about the Libertarian Party.
But we're seeing this happen across the West. That the way politics has potentially been done for decades now just isn't sorting out the crises that the West is facing. So with that in mind, what can the Labour Party do to regain the trust of the electorate? Because it seems to me, and I don't find myself often defending Sir Keir from the comfort of my broadcasting throne, but I'm going to do it. It seems to me that the man's doing all he can to do the right sorts of things.
No, he's not.
Well,
come on.
No, when I say all that he can, all that he can for...
All that he's capable of.
No, all that he can... Well, no, perhaps, but all that he is able to do as the leader of a Labour Party when he knows he's got the backbenchers saying, you cannot cut welfare or we're going to revolt. I mean, this is the difficulty, isn't it? And this is what the Conservatives found. When they pivoted centre, the backbenchers said, no, 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 you're supposed to be right-wing. As Sir Keir Starmer's trying to pivot centre, the backbenchers going, no, 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 you've got to be left-wing, which is why you're seeing this hemorrhaging.
He's got an absolutely enormous majority, and I'm sorry, but I completely disagree. Shabana Mahmood has been able to basically ignore the radical leftists in the Labour Party and actually do what she views the country needs in terms of migration. I just quite frankly think that they haven't got the, I don't know what the word is, but they haven't quite the cojones. They haven't quite got the cojones, especially when it comes to the economy. I mean, fundamentally, the size of the state has increased to about 45% of GDP. You're absolutely right. One of the reasons for this is the refusal to cut the welfare bill. Yes, there were rebellions on the left of the Labour Party. Suspend them. You've got an enormous majority.
I want to speak to you about this, Avni, because we've got Mel Stride coming up after the break, who is, of course, the Shadow Chancellor, and I'm fairly certain he's going to focus in on this issue as well. What we know is Sir Keir Starmer appointed to his private office a woman who used to be part of the IMF and former Deputy Governor of the Bank of England ahead of this budget. We also know that the IMF had said to the Labour Party, look, if you can get down the size of the bloated state, if you can start cutting back on the huge price tag that comes with the welfare state, then your economy might not tank. And then the welfare bill was presented or sort of suggested by Rachel Reeves. There was a backbench rebellion and it sort of disappeared into the dustbin of history. And yet, this really, you know, I want to ask your opinion on this economically. If the IMF are saying it, if other people are sort of looking at essentially worklessness, the lack of growth, and so on and so forth, and sort of saying, well, you've got to do one of two things. You either massively increase taxes or you massively cut government spending. It's very difficult for the Labour Party to do either, isn't it? Because if they increase taxes, they're breaking a manifesto pledge. The country feels overburdened already. Cutting the welfare state is the thing that really gets the goat of the left of their party.
And so, while we're talking about the IMF, let's also recognise that the IMF have been extremely optimistic about the growth of this country in comparison to.
But that was based upon their being welfare cuts.
Other countries, in terms of the welfare cuts. I do expect that the Labour Party are going to have a second go at that, and I think that they are right to do so because I think that the trajectory of that welfare bill is unsustainable. Enormous. I think the thing that they did wrong last time is that the narrative wasn't matched to the policy. By the way, can I just point out that Reem, the right-winger, is nodding along with everything that I'm saying in this, in this context.
She's like, I want to cut spending. I'm like, same, yeah. Is that left-wing
and earlier on immigration, many things.
I'm a libertarian. Like, I hate the government in everything.
Okay. And so, the thing that I would also say is these kind of reforms, to do them properly takes time. And so I believe that we need to invest in services, invest in support, because I believe that people genuinely do want to work. They don't want to sit around on their sofa on welfare, receiving minimal amount of money per week. And this is not about changing the incentives, it's about changing the support so that we help these people back to work. We allow them to work when they can work, and then they have a safety net when they can't.
I know you want to say something, but we're going to go to adverts. Okay. Thank you, Avni. We've got to go to advert break now. We have got Mel Stride joining us after the advert break to continue this conversation. Let's see what he has to say about welfare, and let's wait for both of you to jump down his neck going, well, you could have done something when you were in power. That's coming up after this.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Right, welcome back. Now, just before the break, I had two salivating young ladies wanting to shout what they think needs to happen to save our economy. So let's see if we've got a salivating Shadow Chancellor willing to do the same in the form of Mel Stride MP. Welcome to the show, Mel. Fantastic having you on this morning, especially on a Sunday. Let's talk about what the Chancellor is potentially going to do. We had Avni there from the IPPR saying, look, they do need to do something about the welfare state. It's not a quick and easy solution. But now the Chancellor's suggesting, it seems, that she wants to scrap the two-child benefit cap. What do you think about that?
I think that's the wrong decision. I think it's the wrong decision because it's going to put up the welfare bill, not reduce it, and put it up by about £3.5 billion. And I think there is an element of fairness to the taxpayer here. Those who are not on benefits, when they consider whether they're going to have a particularly large family, have to take tough decisions as to whether they can afford to have a larger family. And yet, under the proposals that we think the Chancellor's going to come forward with, it'll be a case that families on benefit can have as many children as they like, supported by taxpayers, without having to take those kind of tough decisions, and I don't think that's fair.
We know that the welfare state is enormous. We know that there's an increasing problem with worklessness, particularly under in the sort of lower age demographic. And yet it seems to me what the Labour Party are proposing is a loosening up on things like, well, we're not going to pay your benefits if you're not actively seeking work. There's supposed changes here. Instead, looking at a benefit for task force, which could save £1.2 billion. We know that there's been the sort of bones of a welfare reform put to the Labour Party before, and it's been rejected. If you weren't Shadow Chancellor, but Chancellor, what would you be doing?
I'd be getting on top of the welfare budget, and you're right to highlight the fact that, of course, they've tried to do that, couldn't get it through their backbenchers. So I think they're in a very weak position. But you've got to get on top of the welfare budget and more broadly across government. At our conference, I set out £47 billion worth of savings. And then you have to use those savings to both bear down on the size of the deficit, because we're spending far too much on debt interest at the moment. We've got to get that under control. But secondly, we've got to then look at getting down taxes, particularly in areas of the economy that in turn will drive growth, wealth creation, job creation, and in time, of course, more taxes to spend on our public services.
There'll be people listening to this saying, well, that's all very well, but how did the welfare state get so big in the first place? And people will think back to the Conservatives and think, well, you were in power for 14 years and a lot of this bloating happened under your watch.
Well, we did a huge amount, Alex, to get people into employment. In fact, under the last Conservative government, if you go back to 2010, we created 4 million more jobs as a consequence of the way our stewardship of the economy and so on. And I was actually Secretary of State for Work and Pensions at the tail end of our time in office, so we had already brought through changes and reforms to the work capability assessment. That's the gateway onto these longer-term health and sickness benefits. And the OBR had said and scored that would lead to about 450,000 fewer people going on to those benefits. So we were already beginning to arrest that rise. Let's dig into that.
What sort of changes?
The government scrapped it.
Yeah, what sort of changes were you putting in place? Are we talking about things such as not being able to receive benefits if you have a mental health condition?
Yeah, we looked at the work capability assessment, which is the gateway onto those longer-term health and disability benefits, and we tightened that gateway up, particularly around the area of less severe, should I say, mental health conditions like anxiety, mild depression, ADHD and so on, in a way that would have led, as the OBR said, to almost 500,000 fewer people going onto those benefits. Now, the problem is that one of the first things that this government did when it got into office was to scrap all that, come forward with their own botched proposals, which were all hastily scrabbled together at the last minute when they needed to find some savings, and they couldn't get it past their backbenchers. We also were consulting, to your question, on personal independence payments and how we were going to reform those. That was interrupted by the general election. And we went into the last general election with a clear plan for a further £12 billion worth of savings. So these things can be done. They have to be done in a measured and thoughtful way, because you are dealing with millions of people, and in some cases highly vulnerable people. You have to get it right, but you have to do the work, and you have to have the plan, and you have to have the strength as a government to actually bring these reforms through. And we see no evidence, I'm afraid, of any of that from this Labour government.
Now, it's interesting. I've got the Sun open today because on page 15 we're talking in the Sun about what the Chancellor might be proposing to do when it comes to the forthcoming budget, and you've got a piece in there, and so has Nigel Farage. So I want to sort of read out to you what he has to say to see how much you might agree with his policy, because they seem to be running away when it comes to the polls at the moment. He's saying that he would slash foreign aid, basically cut it by 10 billion. He says he'll end universal credit payments for foreign nationals, saving 6 billion. He would raise 5 billion, increasing the immigration health surcharge, and reform PIP disability payments to save another 3.5 billion. He seems to have sat there with a magic calculator and done some sums which he thinks would close the deficit black hole. Do you agree with his policies?
Well, he's certainly copying some of the things, the announcements we've already made around, for example, welfare payments to foreign nationals, although in typical reform style, when they first rushed out with the policy, they vociferously maintained that they would be including EU nationals within that, and then they seem to have backed off somewhat from that position. But what Mr Farage has not said in his article, of course, is that reform's policy is to scrap the two-child benefit cap. So they're in line with the Labour Party. They want to spend more on benefits in that way, and that is not the best way of reviving our economy, I'm afraid.
And now you may say that reform is sort of oscillating over the two-child benefit cap, but when I read what you have to say in the Sun, he's actually put numbers in there and policy proposals. It seems to me that yours reads a bit more like mood music. Is this not the problem with the Conservative Party, that you don't seem to be committing to any sort of particular agenda? And you can argue indeed that we may be a long way off a general election, but people don't really know what you seem to stand for anymore.
I completely do not accept that. I mean, if you look at what we said at conference and my speech at conference, I made it very clear that the way forward for our country is to control the size of government and government spending, to get taxes down and also to get the debt down. I went further than that and set out very specific, fully costed proposals, £47 billion worth of savings across government, including, for example, 23 billion on welfare, 8 billion on getting the size of the civil service back to where it was in 2016, cutting the overseas development aid budget very substantially. Those were real, tangible, well-costed proposals. And I also set out how we would both bring down the deficit as a consequence of those measures, but also cut taxes, so abolish stamp duty on primary residences. You know, this terrible tax is bunging up the property market, has serious economic consequences, that tax. We will abolish it altogether. We will get rid of business rates for 250,000 high street shops and pubs, because that's weighing down their ability to be successful, and also a big offer on tax reductions for younger people in a way that helps them to get on the housing ladder. So I completely disagree with this idea that we're not out there saying concrete things. We absolutely are, and they are things that will be good for the economy and good for hard-working people in our country.
Samel, I really do appreciate your time. Thank you ever so much for coming on the programme today. If I could give his spin doctor a word of advice, I'd say when you're going to put something in the Sun, make it a bit less loosey-goosey. Right. I mean, it's true, isn't it? People actually just want to know what a particular potential future Chancellor may be doing. And let's talk about what a future potential Chancellor may be doing, and talk about some of the things that Samel has said, and indeed some of the proposals that Nigel Farage himself outlines. Avni, do we need to actually admit that we are in pretty woeful economic times at the moment, and perhaps we should start looking at things like foreign aid? I personally have always believed that foreign aid could work a bit like a Marshall Programme. I think it has a huge amount of soft power, but not writing blank cheques to dictators and not giving Pakistan lots of money when, frankly, it doesn't seem to be doing the right sorts of things.
I think on the beginning of your question, are we in a difficult place on the economy? There's a substantial misunderstanding, in my opinion, on how the economy works in this country, and so many people, right-wingers included, are often stating the case that we need to live within our means, we need to tighten our belt, we need to balance the books, and you can see this, the story of this starting with Thatcher. That's not how the economy works. The economy works by investing in growth, expanding the level of tax receipts in the country, and therefore having more in the pot generally. Part of that is investing in services, and so there have been direct links made between the health of the nation and its prosperity, and so investing in services like health itself is a down payment on the country's future. The reason that the economy and the country is in the hole that it is in now is because of decades of austerity, where Osborne failed to invest in infrastructure and services when money was cheap, and now we're paying the price.
Oh, it's all right, he got the Qataris and the Chinese to do that instead, quite frankly. Now, when it comes to economics, some people say it is not a science, it is an art. And you've got your Keynesian view of how the economy works, then you've got other ideas such as the Laffer curve, and if you tax people too much, millionaires will leave, etc., etc. So I could see you, Reem, sort of shaking your head, going, no,
Yeah,
I don't agree with Avni on this. So explain to me what you think the economic medicine should be.
Well, public spending as a proportion of GDP is now at 44%. Half the economy is now the government. And quite frankly, the idea that austerity is the reason why we're in this mess is completely untrue. Austerity didn't really happen, right? We reduced public spending by about 0.9% overall.
Our
it didn't really
happen. Our
decimated
because of austerity.
Our public services are decimated because they're absolutely enormous. I'm sorry, no, Avni, let me finish. I didn't interrupt you, you didn't interrupt me. I will say fundamentally what we're doing is we're spending more and more taxpayer money onto bureaucratic systems that do not work. The health service is one example. We have never spent more on the NHS than we do today, and yet it is crumbling. The NHS is failing, but it is not because it is underfunded. It is because we lack competitive market mechanisms. Look at the rest of Europe. How come Switzerland, Germany, Denmark, the Netherlands, Sweden, all of these countries can genuinely provide really good healthcare services? The idea that you tax more and spend more and then we get more is fundamentally untrue. What we need is to grow the size of the pie. We do not need the government to be investing, which really just means spending more of our money, into various different services. What we need is the government to stay out of the way, let businesses grow, let people get jobs, let people choose what they do with their own money without government bureaucrats wasting it.
Avni, I mean, you talk about how austerity has left scars on our economy. I think the elephant in the room, surely, when it comes to all the topics we've spoken about today, when it comes to our indebtedness, when it comes to the size of the welfare state, worklessness, the decimation of the high street, etc., that there's a big C word that we have yet to discuss, which is COVID. COVID surely has led to a culture where a lot of people are now out of work, a culture where a lot of people want to work 3 days a week from home. There is this sense of apathy, I think, towards industry and entrepreneurialism. COVID has put this government in debt, as it has done many countries in the West. Surely that is more to blame than something that George Osborne did. I mean, I'm not exactly his #1 fan. But surely that is the more recent...
It's not COVID, it's the lockdowns. I'm sorry, but saying it was COVID or the Russia-Ukraine war is completely absolving blame from this government. This government decided to lock us down.
Avni,
they decided to tell us that we cannot leave our homes, that businesses must shut down. It is the government's fault. I think lockdown was one of the most egregious lies and one of the most disgusting aggravations of our liberty that we've ever seen in this country. And the fact that we all just sat there and took it, I think, is even more disgusting.
Avni.
Interesting that you mentioned COVID, because exactly right, as we were saying before, lack of investment in our health services left us absolutely at the knees of COVID.
What do you mean lack of investment? We spend more now than we ever have.
So lack of investment in our public services, particularly our health services, left us at the knees of COVID. Sorry, I did let you finish.
But answer my question. What do you mean by lack of investment?
Can I just finish my point and then I'll come to that?
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm going to go on holiday, guys.
You can't say lack of investment when we literally spend more than ever on the NHS. It's not lack of investment. It's overfunded.
Okay, let me get to that then, because that's simply not true. The amount that we allocate in the spending review for health services this year is proportionately less than it has ever been before in terms of the size of the increase. And that is absolutely true. I'm a health specialist. There was and I'm sure that somebody will fact check. There was a small. There was a small. I mean, we spend more on everything now than we always have. It's about proportionality.
And also more and more.
Ladies, on radio, especially if someone's listening to it in their car, by now their ears are bleeding, so we are going to have to learn to sort of give each other a bit of airtime, and someone speaks and then the other person speaks, because otherwise people are going to blame me for not actually being the conductor of the orchestra. But thank you ever so much. We're going to take a short break now, but don't worry, they're going to be going at each other's throats just after.
They will never, ever change. Just like I was saying, my mother's wisdom, she used to say in Bolton they'd vote for a pig with a red ribbon on it. Well, it's like Tunbridge Wells, they vote for a pig with a blue one in it there when they. But I think all that's turning around. But I'll tell you what really strikes me, though, having seen that poll and gone through the numbers, is if you add up Labour, Lib Dem and the Greens, and then you've got the SNP and Plaid Cymru as well, is they still get 50. There's still half the country who think those people should rule.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello there and welcome back. Now, you can never have too many voices, can you? Too many cooks in the kitchen. So let's invite Dave from London to throw in his 2 bits. Hi there, Dave.
Hi, Alex. How are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
I feel depressed listening to Avni, one of your guests.
Oh, Avni, you've upset Dave.
Sorry,
Why?
Dave.
Why? What's she done?
Well, she started by saying not a lot of people know how the economy works. Then she went on to explain how she doesn't seem to know how it works either. But let's assume it's a matter of opinion.
Yes.
Her opinion is the economy works through mass public spending, which generates jobs because, yeah, you go and build a bridge, someone needs to help you build it. But if that's the way these people think the economy works, why doesn't Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves, so I'll ask this to Avni, why doesn't she start off the conversation on Wednesday and come out unashamedly and say, I know how the economy works because I'm Rachel Reeves. I've been listening to Avni Marjoria. I agree with Avni, and the way the economy works is mass public spending, and the private sector makes no difference to life whatsoever. We can hammer it, we can kill it, we can tax it to death, because all we need to do is spend on public sector. Now, if Avni is really strong on her conviction, I would like Rachel Reeves to come out in Parliament next Wednesday and state that right from the start, so we all know what Avni has now just exposed is that's what they think.
Dave?
So we now have a two-tier society, not just all the two-tier justice and everything else. We now have a two-tier society, which is the public sector and the private sector. Labour are the party of the public sector, not the working class, not the working man.
So, Dave, thank you ever so much. I do feel at the moment that I may as well just not be here. You know, these guys can look after themselves, and Dave will replace me as the interviewer. Thank you ever so much, Dave. You've depressed Dave, haven't he?
Oh.
He thinks that I'm just going to summarise what Dave says, which I'm going to put down as, it ain't fair. His view is, it seems to me, that people in the private sector, the alarm clock Britain, are going out, working their hardest, being hammered all the time with whether it be income tax rises, national employers tax rises, whether it be stealth taxes, fuel duties, etc., etc., that actually we're sort of taxing the people who are the ones who are the money generators and handing it over to people who just aren't doing anything to contribute. That's how I'm going to summarise it.
Dave, I'm so sorry for depressing you on Sunday morning. Hopefully your day will get better, you'll have a nice roast and you'll enjoy the sunshine this afternoon. But in terms of what I said, I wasn't in favour, as Dave says, of mass public spending as the only way that the economy works. I was talking about investment in our services and infrastructure, delivering an element of growth, and that without that investment, we will strangle growth. And so I'm talking very much about economic expansion, the importance of wealth creation, which I think that Dave and I, probably from what he said, actually agree on. Dave, maybe at the end of that explanation, you're not as depressed as I know.
I'm depressed.
I know that Reem will be depressed.
Wealth creation is not created by the state. It is created by the hard-working people in this country that work in the private sector. And quite frankly, one of the problems is that the state is continuously increasing, and so there is more and more incentive for it to get bigger and bigger.
So we were discussing, weren't we, before Dave decided to come and basically phone us as if we're the Samaritans. That's okay, Dave. This is communal catharsis. We have got your back.
Dave's right. I thought the same as Dave.
Paraphrase
I'm
me,
with Dave.
by the way.
Yeah, but let's do it, because what we're discussing during the advert break.
And by the way, Dave, I don't speak on behalf of Rachel Reeves, just to make it perfectly clear. I've got no right to come out on Wednesday and for her to do as I've said. So just reassuring the country on that.
Herself, if I'm honest.
I'm not depressed.
Let's do what we were going to do, which is, I just want, because a lot of people haven't gone to university and studied economics, they don't work for think tanks, their sense of, how things are working politically is visceral, isn't it? It's whether you can get a doctor's appointment and what is the pound in your pocket. And I think a lot of the people out there in the country are probably feeling a bit like Dave. So what is the solution? And let's do it sort of, dummy's guide to how to save Britain's economy. And I'm going to go to you first, Reem. Let's paraphrase in what the solution should and could be.
Radically slash the size of the state, reduce taxes, simplify the tax system, ensure that people are actually being able to keep more of what they earn. And I think that this should be the case across the entirety of the economy.
As Truss proposed, and the chaos that happened
so
after that.
funnily enough, that is not what Truss proposed. Truss did not reduce public spending, but she wanted to cut taxes. What we should be doing is cutting spending, and of course then being able to cut taxes. But you can't cut spending, you can't cut taxes without cutting spending.
As we did during the austerity years, which has led the economy to this incredibly...
As I said earlier, cutting
So,
spending, we've done about 0.9% overall. Hasn't actually occurred. Austerity was a lie, by the way. Austerity did not happen.
Austerity was a lie.
It was a lie.
Ladies,
0.9% difference.
Let's see, OK, because there are two different...
Who perpetuated the austerity lie?
There are two different approaches to the economy, right?
I'm saying it doesn't
Ladies,
happen. Sorry,
please,
Alex.
whose show is this? Come on.
Sorry, but no. I mean, when you're saying, that's a really big thing to say. Reem is saying the austerity didn't exist and it was a lie. I'm asking her what the basis of that is.
Right, no, but I get to ask the questions, and this is what I want to...
No, Alex, sorry, I apologise. Go
Ladies,
ahead.
please. Blimey, it'd be easier conducting interviews at Battersea Cats and Dogs Home right now. Let's try and see if we can find common ground, because we know that there are two very different approaches to the economy. And interestingly, when you girls first started sitting next to each other, you actually agreed on some stuff. And so let's see if we can get back to that point. First of all, welfare. Does it need to be cut?
Yes, absolutely. 1 in 4 people are out of work. And I believe, by the way, Anthony, I think will say that,
1 in 4?
These 1 in 4 working age people between the ages of 16 and 64 are currently out of work. And I think the fundamental problem here is people on the left will often say they have the monopoly on compassion. They are the compassionate ones. They are the people that really care about these people. And I'm saying there is nothing compassionate about a system that consigns thousands of people to a lifetime of worklessness. Work gives you dignity, it gives you structure, it gives you hope.
Avni, do you agree that there does need to be an approach to reducing the size of the welfare state?
Absolutely, I agree with Reem on the end of what she said, which is work brings structure, dignity, hope. Most people that I know, in fact, almost all the people that I know want to work, and so it's about how we design the system to enable that and to support people back into work instead of what the current system does, which is locking them into being on, for example, disability benefits in perpetuity. And but that means, for example, you know, there are times when people need to take the risk and go into work, and then they may feel that their benefits are taken away.
Wait.
I'm agreeing.
Yeah, okay, good. So the next thing I'm going to do before I get out my acoustic air guitar and start singing Kumbaya and light a little campfire between us, let us also now go down the route of taxation. In order to try and help us get out of the slump, Avni, should there be a case to be made for increasing taxes?
I think that there are a number of tax loopholes that can be closed that equates to tax reform that will deliver some money for the Chancellor. For example, gambling taxes, gambling companies aren't currently taxed VAT. That's a loophole. We could tax gambling companies, and the amount that we would raise, in fact, would be enough to remove the two-child benefit cap.
Go to the black market. I think that we should not be raising taxes, but the problem is, unless we start reducing
public spending... That's not raising taxes, that's equalising the taxes that companies like gambling companies pay, companies pay
the reality
with
is
the
those
rest of
gambling companies
business.
will just go to the black market. People will just gamble illegally, and
I think that you're saying that without any evidence and off the hoof. I don't believe that people go that people will, as a result of VAT being paid, that people will then dabble in the grey and black economy.
People are already dabbling in the grey and black
economy. Let's focus on the fact that Alex needs to be paid for sitting here and listening to you guys, which means we have to have a commercial break, otherwise this station won't make money, and I'm going to be living under a motorway bridge with cats. So thank you ever so much to Reem Ibrahim and to Avni Majoria.
It's been super fun. Thank you very much.
It's been great fun to have you here, ladies, and it is a complicated thing when it comes to economics. If only everybody came to the same conclusions and we could have a lovely, harmonious way of going forward. Good luck to Rachel Reeves next week. I think she's going to need it, and good luck to the state of the UK economy. We do have Rachel's back, let's be fair, because if she gets this wrong, we're all going to suffer. But the jury is out. It's going to dominate the headlines, of course, over the coming days until we actually have that budget. And no doubt I'll be meeting these two again to mop it up when that happens. Now, when we come back, our attention is going to be focused on the BBC, because Lisa Nandy says that she could block a rise in the BBC licence fee should it actually be cut. Should not paying it become decriminalised? And also, there's been reports that BBC headlines have been 3 times as likely to vilify Israel over Hamas. This comes amid the resignation of a BBC board member over the Trump scandal. That's going to be our focus on the other side of these commercials. I'll see you in just a moment.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back. I don't know about you, but that was very lively for a Sunday, wasn't it? I mean, those two, they actually enjoyed themselves. They really liked it. I think they put, as they walked out, I bet they're going down in the lift. Everyone's still discussing the economy. I'm like, can you use some of that energy to sit down and figure it all out and then send your conclusions to Rachel Reeves, please? I think she needs all the help she can get at the moment. Now, enough of the economy for now. We're going to have enough of that, aren't we, over the course of the next week. Let's talk about the BBC, shall we? Because, blimmin' heck, Auntie's been in some hot water. Trying to appease the ire of Donald Trump doesn't seem to have worked. It was a rather mealy-mouthed apology after they were caught bang to rights for splicing together two separate parts of his speech. Back at the end of his previous presidency when the Capitol Hill riots began, to make it look as if he'd said, come on, let's go down and fight together, which, well, if you're going to take a bit of a speech from here and a bit an hour later and put it together to say something else, that ain't journalism. That is actually storytelling, but not the truth. And so I personally think he's got every reason to be rather aggrieved by that. And the BBC said, oh, we're sorry, it was an accident. No, it wasn't. I used to work for the BBC. I've edited things together before. You don't accidentally sit in an editing suite and suddenly find you've had a cup of tea, and when you come back, the machine has done its own magical clipping and cutting and splicing, thrown a bit of doom music over the top and put a grey filter, and all of a sudden what looks like taking a clip from a speech now says something entirely different. That ain't no accident. And so I do not blame Donald Trump for saying, come on now, especially when it turned out it wasn't just Panorama doing this. 'Twas also Newsnight. Now it transpires that a study of BBC headlines since the October the 7th attack has found three times the headlines were more likely to be critical of Israel than Hamas. Now, this is research by a media monitoring group, and references to Hamas committing possible war crimes appeared once in coverage, while those claiming an Israeli genocide, famine, starvation appeared 45 times. This is a study by the Committee for Accuracy in Middle East Reporting and Analysis, which snappily and happily creates the acronym CAMERA. It's one of those acronyms, isn't it, where someone sat there and tried to make the acronym and come up with the name to fit. But there you go. I tend to imagine that they're probably right. And now, meanwhile, Lisa Nandy says that she could block a possible BBC licence fee rise. You would think, wouldn't you, at the moment that the corporation is in deep doo-doos for partiality, to now ask the public for more money would be rather egregious. Let's speak to Malcolm Clark, who is a documentary maker, but he has also joined a BBC licence fee boycott. Let's start off with the fact that the Media Culture Secretary has turned around and said, well, she might block a BBC licence fee rise. I mean, fair dues, surely. This is not the economic climate in which to be asking for more money, especially when more and more people are saying they're not going to pay the licence fee at all, and especially when the corporation is under so much heat for not doing its job properly.
Absolutely. I mean, even if the BBC wasn't embroiled in these various scandals, it is ludicrous that everybody in Britain who has a telly and wants to watch live TV has to pay some sort of tax to an organisation like the BBC when we have all the other fabulous options available from Netflix to Now to whoever, which we pay a subscription to, and we pay it monthly. And, you know, I don't know about you, but almost every month I look and think, Now's pretty rubbish, so I'm going to stop and wait for a little while for its content to get better. And I don't see why you couldn't do the same with the BBC. You'd pay a monthly subscription, and if it starts talking nonsense and doing ridiculous sort of anti-Israel stuff, or if its content is boring and it doesn't do any good drama, you just stop and wait until it sorts itself out. That's what I do with all three of the four, the Amazon Prime or the other outlets that I use, and I think most people have got used to that. And this old, clumsy model set up in the 1920s, not the 2020s. I mean, it's absurd, and it's just not, not fit for the modern age.
Times have definitely changed from when we basically just had one telebox channel to look at, and now we've got a gazillion plus all of the on-demand services. But some people might argue, and I partially put myself in this camp, almost unwillingly, okay, but I do partially put myself in this camp. When I look around the world, there are lots of countries jostling to have a sort of state broadcaster, whether it's Al Jazeera, Russia Today, CTV, TRT, the list goes on and on, France 24. It's actually quite a coveted thing to have a media organisation with its tentacles that reach into almost every country on earth, which can sell brand Britain abroad. And the BBC has always, many might say, been a great flag carrier for the United Kingdom. Should it be able to cut its licence fee in half to be more realistic about the current market, potentially reduce its offering back to the bare bones, and be called to heel when it comes to partiality? Do you think there could be an argument to maintain a licence fee?
I mean, everybody who's British thinks it's fantastic, the flag is being flown by this respected organisation, but I don't see why old ladies and old guys up and down the country from Scunthorpe to Stirling should be paying a tax to fly the flag in some remote corner of the planet. If we think as a country that it's important enough to fly the flag, then come up with some way that doesn't allow our government to interfere, give them 200 million, give them however much we as a country have agreed that it's worth flying the flag, give them that money. But that's a whole different question from being funded by ordinary people in the middle of a cost of living crisis.
Let's talk about the question of partiality, and not so much talking about clearly Trump derangement syndrome, which we all know many segments of the media seem to suffer. But let's talk in particular about October the 7th, this sort of fetishised conflict, which has come to define which sort of tribe you belong to in the United Kingdom quite appallingly, in my opinion. There's technology out there today that you could quite, I think, reasonably used to audit partiality. This report has come from something called the Committee for Accuracy in Middle East Reporting and Analysis. The BBC could potentially invest in some sort of underlying AI monitor. So if it starts dipping into, do you know what, you're not balancing your coverage right now, they could have alert systems going off on the desks of the editors. What do you think needs to be done, maybe not just for the BBC, but a lot of news output, to make sure that what it is delivering is the truth and not an opinion?
I mean, the biggest thing that needs to be done at the BBC, it bangs on about diversity and inclusion on, trans rights or whatever, but it doesn't have a diversity of opinion. So it's staff, it's vast number of staff. If you go to a small organisation at Channel 5, tiny number of staff, tiny number of managers. Still, the BBC has this giant sclerotic group of staff people, and they're not all from the same, cut from the same cloth. But if you have, thousands of people and they all go to the same staff restaurants and they all sit and chat in the staff cafes, and they're all pulled from friends who know friends, and they help each other get jobs or whatever and get promotion, and they have to keep their nose clean to get the next job up the hierarchy, they all end up having some form of groupthink. So that, say on Israel or whatever, if somebody, edits a show in a particular way or asks to be, an interviewee to say a certain thing, nobody else in the team is going to challenge it because they all think the same thoughts. They all share the same opinions. And so I'm sure AI could help. But what really needs to happen at the BBC is that they go back to the way they used to be, and have more like the arguments that you just had between these two women who were shouting at each other, respectfully, but giving each side of their opinion. And that doesn't happen so much at the BBC now. In the old day, things were challenged, and editors would then say, are you sure? And where are the sources? And who backs this up? And that the editorial quality of the output of the BBC's factual and news stuff has got worse and worse over the last 20 years.
Malcolm, you sound like a man who's suffering from BBC PTSD. If that is the case, I want to confess that so am I, because I also once worked for the BBC. I was one of their VIP trainees, and I would go as far as to say it's not so much that everyone sits around the table agreeing with everything, which they do, you're absolutely right about that, but if you happen to be the dissenting voice, if you happen to be the person who says, well, hang on, I think there might be a story in the fact that people out there don't like the European Union, or people out there are concerned about immigration, or people out there don't like the pro-Palestine marches. If you are the person who holds those opinions, there's almost a culture of fear. You dare not say it out loud.
Yeah. And the ridiculous thing is that, you know, I was openly gay within the BBC 20 to 25 years ago for about a decade. There was never one bit of bigotry, prejudice. It didn't affect my career in the slightest. Now I talk to young LGBT so-called, you know, staff members at the BBC, and they've got these various campaigns, and everybody, all the staff are told about homophobia and how dangerous it is, and they all go to training against transphobia. It's ludicrous. The BBC was the most liberal, easygoing, tolerant place to work. So why have, as you said, you know, they now claim that staff live in fear if they don't do all this DEI training? It's absolutely ridiculous. The BBC has become absurd by focusing on exactly the wrong things, all this woke nonsense, instead of sticking to the knitting, which is editorial quality, challenging each other to make sure that everything is factually accurate. And the end of all that obsession with woke stuff is it's in the crisis that we can all see unfolding.
I mean, how scandalous do you think the situation is at the BBC? We've just learned that a BBC board member called Shamit Banerjee has now quit. He was not necessarily from the BBC himself. He was from the private sector. But he said that he wasn't consulted about the events leading up to the resignations of Tim Davie, who was a former Director General, and Deborah Turness, who is the BBC News Chief Executive, and said that this man is the founder of Cordycept LP, which is an advisory and investment firm, and had been a non-executive director at the corporation since 2022. The BBC are clearly in one heck of a mess internally. I've often thought that surely the foundations of being able to charge the licence fee should come with the mantra of no taxation without representation, and perhaps therefore a future Director General should have to come up with some sort of manifesto of how he would spend a reduced licence fee, the sort of content he would produce, and the sort of issues that he believes the BBC has to tackle. Or she, should I say, being, politically correct, of course.
Do you know what? The favourite, the only really genuinely popular with both the public and the staff, the only guy who was truly popular as a Director General was Greg Dyke. And he didn't exactly set out a manifesto, but he was very opinionated, and he made clear what he was going to do at the BBC. And he was an attitude. And he walked through what was then the headquarters at White City, and he looked up and he saw this garden area that was all sort of fenced off, and he said, "What's that?" And they said, "Oh, that's just some really nice sculpture and plants." And he said, "Well, why can't your staff go and use it?" And so suddenly this area that we'd all looked at longingly was opened up, and the staff could go there and use it for sandwiches and tea and all the rest of it. He then stood up to the politicians. He walked through the BBC, shaking hands and talking to everybody. Instead, now you've got these men in suits like Tim Davie that people never meet. You don't know what they think. They feel like they're constantly scared about what the politicians will say. I think what the BBC really needs, as you say, is somebody who's really quite forthright, who we get is impartial and stands up for the BBC, values what it was always about, waves the flag, in other countries or whatever, but the public can trust that he sort of reflects their values. Nobody looks at Tim Davie and has a sense of what values he has, and he certainly doesn't seem like he represents the average Joe.
Well, he's gone now, hasn't he? Malcolm Clark, thank you ever so much. A really interesting conversation. And it's a conversation, I think, that's going to rattle on and on. I mean, the BBC are now set to lose about £1 billion from people cancelling their licence fees. And, I always say, if I was the Minister for Culture, this is what I would do. I'd say to the BBC, you know, asking for over 10 quid a month is ridiculously disproportionate compared to what people pay for other services. So that's got to be at least halved. And frankly, get out of the lanes of the independents. You don't need to be making podcasts. You don't need 1,000 different radio stations catering for everybody's whim and every little subculture. You know, just have a few national stations and let your programme represent a diversity so people can use appointment to view. Then stick that stuff on your on-demand app instead of creating a load of extra podcasts, which, frankly, is not your business. Also, why do you need 4 TV channels when you could survive probably with just 1 or 2? And I would also say, if you don't sort yourselves out when it comes to partiality, and if you don't actually bring back this idea that a journalist can come from the working classes, OK? We've had brilliant editors, for instance, of the Today programme, like Rod Liddle, people who actually represent the common man, because that is from whence they came. Journalism has become too hyper-professionalised, which is why you end up with all these Camillas with their Camilla-ish attitudes. It's very easy. I think there's multiple solutions for the BBC's crisis. The BBC might yet be able to be saved, or perhaps it just ain't fit for purpose in the modern era. Let me know your thoughts on that and everything else we have been discussing today, because following the commercial break that is about to come, it's time for your calls and your messages. So if you'd like to have a chit-chat, it's 03444991000. That's your normal network rate. You can phone lovely Tommy. He will take down your number and your name and give you a call back. You can also use that number to send me a WhatsApp message or leave me a voice note on WhatsApp. If you'd rather send me a text message, the number is 87222. You have to write the word talk before you write out your message if you're going to be old-fashioned. OK, put the kettle on, but don't go anywhere, because I'm back to hear from you just after this.
They will never, ever change. Just like I was saying, my mother's wisdom, she used to say in Bolton they'd vote for a pig with a red ribbon on it. Well, it's like Tunbridge Wells who vote for a pig with a blue one in it there when they swim. But I think all that's turning around. But I'll tell you what really strikes me, though, having seen that poll and gone through the numbers, is if you add up Labour, Lib Dem and the Greens, and then you've got the SNP and Plaid Cymru as well, is they still get 50. There's still half the country who think those people should rule.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello and welcome back. Now, if you want to have a chit-chat, it's 0344 499 1000. There's a lot to talk about today, so don't be shy. Give a girl a call. You can also use that number to send me a WhatsApp or leave me a voice note on WhatsApp, or indeed, if you'd like to send a text message, it's 87222. Put talk before your message. Let's do some messages now, because they have been streaming in and I'm yet to address any of them. And Grant says, the BBC should be free, but they should use advertising to pay for it and have one of their channels pay per view. Now, is this idea all of a sudden that you're using advertising to back up your content actually compromising the partiality, or is that just the real world? It doesn't matter whether you're advertising dog food or diapers. that's fine. Just make sure your content is still impartial. Let me know your thoughts on that. Barbara in London says, Alex, your left-wing guest doesn't get it, that the state does not generate income. It all comes from the private sector. Also, when Blair took office, the country had the largest budget surplus in its history. He spent the lot in 1 year. When they left office 13 years later, they left a note saying, sorry, there's no money left. So your socialist guest could blame austerity on her own party. Remus switched on, says another person. Avni is not in command of the facts. Well, you're a partial lot, aren't you? And well done, Reem, for being the voice of reason and common sense. Well done for actually providing factual answers and substance rather than word salad. The left are simply unable to provide any meat on the bone. They use vacuous and meaningless words to back up an ideology without substance, but constantly interrupt and shout down when the discussion goes against their argument. So it's very clear to me that you lot, when it comes to economics, are definitely slightly more on the right, aren't you? What are your thoughts on the BBC, and what are your thoughts on other topics we're going to be discussing coming up a bit later? Especially, I want to know whether you think that the UK is becoming perhaps a more racist society. I've noticed there's definitely, people keep banging on, don't they, about the Overton window. I'm fed up with hearing the Overton window's moved, but it has, hasn't it? And it does seem to me that there is do you think that there's a risk of it veering into rather unpalatable grounds? And look, I'm as right-wing as they come. You know that, right? You know good old Alex ain't about to suddenly join up the Socialist Workers' Party, get a short fringe, although I did have a bit of hair loss, which makes me look a bit like Falcon from Gladiators in the 90s. I do. There is part of me that sort of thinks, oh, rhetoric's getting rather dangerous. But I blame this a lot on the mad leftist open borders policies. We are going to be discussing that with a man I haven't caught up with for a long time, Ralph Schulhammer, after the next break. I want your thoughts on everything we're discussing today. The number is on your screen. If you happen to be listening and not watching, 0344 499 1000. I'd love to have a chat with you. Let's do just that now, because Pete joins us from Sussex. Good morning to you, Pete.
Hi, Alex. How are you?
Yeah, I'm OK. I'm bouncy today. You can tell I've had my Weetabix and a good night's sleep.
I apologise. I caught the last part of your conversation with Iman, the Labour person. However, I think
you mean Reem. I've just sort of decoded what you said there. Reem and Avni.
OK. So what's been missed in the conversation this morning was the new stealth tax, which Labour have brought in from the 10th of November to every single self-employed person, that they now have to have their accounts done every 3 months. They can now go direct into your account and take fines from £200 to £500, yet they will not respond to a query for 60 months.
Oh, Pete. I love you, Pete.
Really... It was brought in such an underhand way.
Oh, Pete, can I just say, that is a brilliant topic to raise. I am self-employed and I know exactly what you're talking about. And I am personally terrified of what I see coming over the horizon.
I don't understand how that's growth.
Well, no, so this is what they're going to do, isn't it? So first of all of a sudden now, you can't use an accountant. You still have to have one, but you have to have digital programming to do all of your accounts for you, which is going to be plugged into your bank account. And then that is what's going to have to be filed rather than paperwork, which gives them access into, well, all of that information. Now, we know, don't we, this government are desperate to bring in digital ID. Now, digital ID is going to be connected to your national insurance number, which will then be connected to your accounting, which will be connected to your digital accounts, which will be connected to your bank account. On top of all this, of course, we've already got the digitisation of the NHS. I actually believe in digitising the NHS in terms of using this to actually keep our records properly rather than in cobweb-covered filing cabinets in the basements of GP surgeries, which is a madness. But how long until they suddenly attach your NHS card and whether you're entitled to free healthcare to your digital filing of your account so it can calculate your sick pay, and your doctor can say yes, 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 they definitely deserve to be on these benefits or don't deserve to be on these benefits. And then, of course, the government are going to bring in other things, aren't they? Such as, well, the country's really fat, so you've got to watch what you eat. The best way to tackle obesity is to be eating the right food.
Totally Orwellian.
It is.
It's unbelievably... well, they can't answer for it because they bring it in by stealth.
Oh,
and that's the annoying thing.
I wish they did bring it in by stealth. What they do is just go suddenly, da-da, this is what you've got to do. No debate in Parliament, no asking whether we voted for this or whether we want it. It's going to be forced upon us. And of course, the trap will be, if you don't do this and you're not submitting your accounts correctly, you will face fines. It's not going to be something we can opt out of.
Totally agree. And by the NHS, this is a Tony Blair thing, we already have the NHS app.
This is what I'm saying. So how long will the NHS app connects to the Digital ID app, which connects to your HMRC app, which connects to your bank account, and before you know it, the whole of your world is there to be scoured by AI in line with government policy, and hey-ho, you finally got the social credit system that they love in communist China. Now, you might call me a conspiracy theorist.
Spot on.
You don't call me, you know I'm right, don't you? Oh.
Yes, you was absolutely spot on. When I saw it, it really angered me when I saw it.
It doesn't just anger me, it terrifies me.
Have a great Sunday. Great show.
Oh, you too. Thank you ever so much, Pete in Sussex. Now, do you know what I said before, haven't I, about that Fabian Society? It's been one of our biggest hits on this channel. You go onto their page, right? You look at all of their policy proposals. You also look at how many former Labour Prime Ministers and members of the Cabinet come from the Fabian Society. And basically, why don't you just treat some of their reports and their ideas as a potential future manifesto? And then you suddenly realise that, what sounds like conspiracy, unfortunately, is probably going to come to pass. And I don't like it. It terrifies me. It makes me feel, sends shivers down my spine, and I'm caught up in all this rubbish. And you will be too. Right, OK, we're going to take a short break now. That was a great call from Pete. I love it when we have a bit of a left field topic we weren't necessarily planning on talking about, but we do anyway, because that is the fun of being at the home of common sense, where nothing is off the table. Right, going to take a short break now, but when we come back, I'm going to be joined by the brilliant political theorist, Ralph Schulhammer. I love that man to the ends of the earth. We don't get enough of him. We're going to be discussing the ridiculous state of our open borders, all of the games and the tricks that asylum seekers are using. We're going to be discussing what I like to call the illegal immigration industrial complex, and also asking the question of whether this ridiculous, farcical, dangerous and unfair open borders system we have in the United Kingdom and across the West is potentially leading to not just a more divided society, but racism. That's coming up after this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, welcome back to the show, and I'm joined now, because I don't want to delay anymore. I'm joined by the wonderful Ralph Schulhammer. Ralph, I've missed you, son. How you doing, lad?
Well, thank you so much for this great introduction. I missed you as well. It's great to be back on.
Oh, I really like the fact that my shirt is coordinating with your chair. What a brilliant little aesthetic that is, an accidental aesthetic. OK, let's talk about, first of all, how ridiculous our open borders are, how people are gaming the system, what I like to call the illegal immigration industrial complex. I'm really trying to make that catch on, by the way. Or maybe it could just be immigration industrial complex. We're now finding out that people from Pakistan are using holiday work and student visa as loopholes to lodge record number of UK asylum claims. Asylum from Pakistan? What on earth are you talking about? There's nothing wrong with Pakistan. I don't like the place. I've worked there a number of times and I can't say it's on a list of places I'd choose to go on holiday. But the ridiculous thing, there's plenty of Pakistanis in this country who go in and out of the country because last time I checked, it is not at war.
Well, it's the same with Turkish asylum claims in Germany. And I'm very glad that you mentioned the student visa issue, because as some of your viewers probably know, the European Union has now decided to extend the Erasmus program onto North Africa and the Middle East. And it's going to be exactly the same thing. Like, you allow people to come as quote unquote students. And once they set foot on your territory, they will A, bring plenty of relatives, and B, they will then claim asylum. So there's always the talk about using loopholes, but in fact, these are not loopholes. This is an active policy, I would say, by the British government, but also by the European Union. Because if it's just a loophole, you could close it, but they don't want to close it.
Ralph, this is exactly why I love having you on the show, because when I saw that myself, the discussion of expanding Erasmus to North Africa and the Middle East, I thought, what on earth are you doing? This is suicidal. Because if there's one thing that we know, some of the most Islamist and radical people in that part of the world are the younger generation. They're not sitting there going, we love the Western world, we want to, ban the burqa, and we hate the pro-Palestine marches. They are potentially the very people who are going to spread those sorts of ideas. And most of these young men are the ones trying to get into boats illegally. And the brilliance of the EU has turned around and said, oh, don't you worry about that. I know how we're going to stop the small boats. Why don't you just come legally anyway? Why on earth are they doing this? You can see the terror threats going on. The problems in Germany, in Sweden, in the United Kingdom, in France. And at the same time in Brussels, they go, I know what we need. We need more young men from the Middle East and North Africa. What is going on?
I mean, it's diabolically brilliant, right? You just reclassify refugees as students, so you can then, quote unquote, again, I'm sorry for all the air quotes, you can then close the refugee loophole and you just open the student loophole. No, I think the reason is it was quite well put in a negative way, unfortunately, once again, in a recent article by The Economist that wrote that those European countries that promote pro-natalist policies, right, that want to get the, let's call the native Europeans to have more children, that this is basically just another form of white supremacy. So we are running two experiments in the world at the moment. So you have the parts of Eastern and Central Europe who say we need to have more children. And then you have the Western and partially American experiment that is we need more immigration. We will see which one is going to work out. But if you look at the UK at the moment, we have to talk about another uncomfortable issue as well. If I got the numbers correct, and I checked them twice, I mean, we are close to 50% of all pregnancies being terminated in the UK. So at some point, right, a civilization also needs the will to survive.
Do you know, these are huge topics and very important to discuss. And the difficulty is, I mean, look, going back to this absolutely crackpot concept in the EU that we need to be allowing people from hotspots of the world that are ridden with Islamism and terrorism to freely come and join our universities, when we've already got extremist anti-Semitic attitudes on campus, when we're already seeing a massive change to the demographies of certain towns and cities, that you kind of have to ask yourself, is this conspiracy or is it just chaotic thinking? Are these people just brainwashed? Because it comes to a point that you can see the demonstrations on the streets of Spain, Portugal, Italy, France, Sweden, you name it, across Europe. The general public are rising up going, we don't want this to happen. We're scared about the changes on our streets. We also can see repeatedly Christmas markets surrounded by concrete blocks, extremist rhetoric on our streets, people sticking up that blimmin' pro-Palestine flag, and then when the British with their stiff upper lips try and counter this by just sticking up a Union flag on a lamppost, oh, that's racist and you're intimidating people. Well, the centre's not going to hold anymore. We're breaking apart so quickly. This is chaotic. So why are these weirdos in Brussels doing this? Why?
Well, it's not just the weirdos in Brussels. When in 1968 Enoch Powell held or gave his Rivers of Blood speech, right, the reaction by the British public was overwhelmingly in support of Enoch Powell. Like, I mean, we got all the letters that were written to the editor. All of this was in support of him. So basically, for almost 60 years, the British people, but also the European people, have told their governments, we want less immigration, we want fewer people from countries that are culturally different from us. But for almost 60 years, a policy was conducted that was doing the exact opposite. I think it's a mixture of, guilt for the war and guilt for, colonialism and guilt for imperialism. I do think that plays a huge role. And I think it was partially also, of course, the economic class that thought they can import, a cheap servants class. And now this whole Ponzi scheme of immigration is starting to crumble. But I'm afraid it's not crumbling quickly enough.
But the thing is that I totally agree with everything you're saying, but there's something else going on here, isn't there? I mean, I just feel there's viscerally something else going on, because you look at what's going on across the West, whether it's America, whether it is France, whether it is the United Kingdom. In France, I was looking at the polling for if there was a presidential election held tomorrow, Jordan Bardella would become the next president of France. He is, of course, the protege of Marine Le Pen, who might be prevented from being part of public life by lawfare. Oh, we haven't seen that one before, have we? In the United Kingdom, we have Reform UK constantly dominating the polls. This is a pattern that we have seen across the West. The public are screaming out for radical change. Democratically, the public are saying, we don't want to have mass immigration forced down our throats. We don't want to see the Islamization. We want to see our heritage protected. Perhaps actually, perhaps if people felt that there was more confidence in their society, in their sense of nationhood, they might be having more babies. And yet what we've got is a layer above the layer of national democracy, which itself is constantly compromised by all of these games of demonisation, lawfare, etc. We've got the sort of supranational layer who seem to be the people who, for whatever reason, want to bludgeon the Western world to death with their mallet of malice. Why?
It's not just the supernatural level. I agree with you. But look, I mean, for example, in Germany, in France, and in Austria, there have been massive increases in the vandalization of churches, and nobody talks about it. Now, why am I mentioning this? Because Christianity, for better or worse, is still very central to Western civilization. But if you desecrate the church, if you spray graffiti on it, nobody is talking about it. We have conversations about whether we are more racist than in the past, when in fact every symbol for Western civilization is denigrated, is torn down, or is violated in whichever way or form, and the governments don't do anything about it. And this, right, it's even if Brussels would no longer exist, if the European Union would disappear. You see it in the UK. I mean, you guys did have Brexit, right? What has exactly changed after Brexit? So it's very often a comfortable excuse. I'm not accusing you of this, but very often people use the EU as an excuse, but they could do something on the national level and they still don't do it. And the reason for this is because I believe since 1968, it's kind of my cutoff point, they despise their own people. And this is true for conservatives, or this quote-unquote so-called conservatives, and liberals and the left. They despise their own population, they despise their own people, and this is why they conducted the policy they conducted over the last 60 years. I'm happy to see that new political movements are now emerging. I hope they're going to emerge quickly enough, because if they don't, all of this is going to get very, very ugly very, very quickly.
How important do you think it is? I love the fact that none of this is scripted. We're just having our own conversation. It's great. It's like being down the pub with you, Alf. How important do you think it is for the right wing politically, or the populists politically across Europe, to actually come together and work together? Because the left wing seem to be very, very good at this. I mean, to me, that is what the entirety of the whole EU apparatchik status is. It is a load of leftists getting together and making sure they get their own way and finding ways to make sure the public don't get theirs. So how important is it for all of these populist leaders to get together and go, we need to join together to start fighting back against this?
Well, I think in the details there will have to be different policies for different countries. But overall, I'm very glad you mentioned this. This is one of my biggest issues, and I mean no disrespect, with Nigel Farage. I think in the past he did too much gatekeeping. You don't have to take over every talking point from Le Pen. You don't have to take over every talking point from the AfD. But as you correctly said, on the broader issue, right, stopping Islamization, stopping mass immigration, preserving Western civilization, creating conditions for people to have more children again, I think they agree on this and they should cooperate on this. This was something the left has always been better. The left was always cooperating with the lunatic fringe. And to be quite honest, I mean, the AfD, Le Pen, I mean, these are not crazy people. I mean, every party has their crazy fringe, but overall, they are what conservatives were before 1968.
Yeah, no, indeed. And actually, I'd say when you say the left always cooperating with the lunatics, they've become the lunatics, quite frankly, because if your policy is let's bring in a load of students from North Africa and the Middle East, that is lunatic. That is some sort of sick social engineering to end your civilization. I don't care how extreme that sounds.
I mean, it's almost, you know, this phenomenon when you're proven wrong and then you double down on the wrong position. This is a little bit what the left is doing. They still believe you just have to set foot on English soil and you become as English as, I don't know, Henry VIII. I mean, this is a completely absurd thing to say, and we have to push back against this. People need to have a shared past, because only then can they have a shared present, and only then can they have a shared future. And by a shared past, I mean that you feel affection for Britain's history, that you see their history as your history, that you get goosebumps when you read the biography of Lord Nelson. Yes, I know this sounds cheesy, but this is what makes a nation. It's, as Abraham Lincoln said, it's mystic chords that we have that tie us to previous generations and to future generations, and somebody who just got off the boat does not have that connection.
I totally agree with everything you say, and I don't think it sounds cheesy or mawkish. I think it sounds commonsensical. I have two more questions for you, Ralph. Let's start with the big, heavy ones, by the way. You're not going to get off lightly in this interview. Let's first of all start off with, I think there's a palpable sense out there among the ordinary man and woman of the United Kingdom that perhaps we've gone beyond the 11th hour. Perhaps even though we're now beginning to see a possibility that our next Prime Minister isn't going to be from one of the legacy parties, that how we now reverse that destruction is such a big, weighted, complicated issue that I think a lot of people are already putting their hands up and going, well, I surrender. It's done. It's over. Too much now has to be done to correct the mess we find ourselves in. Do you think that there is still light at the end of the tunnel?
But I think it was Margaret Thatcher who once said, you don't wait for the right people, you create the conditions that the wrong people are forced to do the right thing. And this is what I'm hoping for. So I wish Nigel Farage all the best. I think there's a good chance that he will become the next Prime Minister. But if he's not going to deliver, his Prime Ministership will probably be very short-lived. So, and he understands this. I mean, whatever one thinks of him, he's a smart person, so he knows this. And the same is true in Germany, the same is true in France. At some point, these parties, and I hope they will, they have to deliver. They have to close down the expectation gap that has opened up within the population. Now, but I will say one more thing. The longer we wait, the longer it takes, the harder the way back will be. And a commentator once said, and this is a very dark thing to say, but I think he's not wrong, along the lines of the good people probably cannot solve the problem because they might not be willing to go to the lengths that are necessary. I don't think we are there yet, but we are closing in on that scenario.
And that actually leads me quite neatly to my final question, which the Home Secretary has said that Britain is becoming more racist. And do you know what? I actually tend to agree with her, because what I see happening is people are becoming so desperate. They're so angry at the sacrifice of their own cultural values at the altar of this pro-immigration, pro-multiculturalism, the sense of shame they're being made to feel about being nationalist, but also the very rapidly changing demographics of their towns and cities, that the frustration and the resentment is palpable. And that worries me. It worries me because I personally don't subscribe 100% to ethno-nationalism, but that isn't to say I also don't worry about these sweeping demographic changes. So when it comes down to the nitty-gritty of, OK, Muslims are part of the United Kingdom, but there's a big difference between the mad Islamists and those people who came over, 3 generations ago and actually are more likely to have, 11s and a cup of tea and a picture of King Charles on the wall, although perhaps their children may not be. How you then sort of manage to negotiate that particularly thorny landscape? Do you think that there's a risk that Europe is becoming more racist?
Of course, there's always a risk that the pendulum is pushing in the other direction. But I would immediately add, I don't really think that racism is the correct term, because Islam is not a race. If Islam is a race, then the Hannah Montana fan club and the Taylor Swift fan club are racist. It's a religion. And at some point, you pick a religion, you pick your values, you pick your attitudes in life. And very often, these are not compatible with a Western way of life. And if then the people of Britain and the people of Europe say, we want to keep our way of life, and you can keep your way of life, but keep it where your actual home is, I think think that is absolutely okay. There was this weird thing. There was one tweet, I think, by a Muslim that asked for refuge in the United States because apparently Muslims are treated so badly in the UK. And somebody reacted to it by saying, well, if you want to be a Muslim, why don't you go to a Muslim country? And I think that's absolutely accurate. Listen, I have no problem with Sharia law in the Islamic world, but I don't want it in the UK. I would not support, child marriage, but if they want to do it in Iran, that's an issue for the Iranian people. And the same, with abusing young boys. If this is happening in Afghanistan, that's an issue for the Afghan people. But I don't want it in the UK, and I don't want it in Europe. I don't think that's racism. That's a desire to preserve our way of life that has, for the most part, been very successful, which is why all these people want to come here and destroy this very successful life. So no, it's not racism. It's a consciousness that our culture, in many ways, I believe, is superior to others. This is objectively true, and I congratulate the British people and the European people for finally realizing it and standing up to defend it. This was long overdue.
Ralph, I've got to ask you, did you decorate your home office to coordinate with our studios?
Oh, no. This is pure coincidence. Pure coincidence. Now that people on Twitter can see where I am, I think this is from my hidden lair where I can spout all my far-right conspiracies.
I love it. Also, I got to let you know, I don't know if you've ever, because you have been in our studios before. As you walk in through the studio door, there's a picture in the gallery which is there to sort of show all the technical whiz kids how to sort of line up a shot and have you written this on the strap line and da-da-da-da-da. And so there's a sort of screen grab of an example guest, and it's you.
Well, I mean, this shows you how racist the British are, right? If they use an Austrian guy as the best role example for how to set up your home video camera. This is the thing. The British people, let me say this once again as a foreigner who's in the UK all the time, the British people are not racist. Is there a small racist fringe like there is in every country? And always keep in mind, compared to whom? Try being black in Pakistan, try being Christian in Nigeria, although again, Christianity per se is on the race. But there are many, way more racist places in the world, which is why everybody wants to come to Europe and the West, and everybody wants to come to the UK.
Can I just say, I always love a bit of hammer time. Thank you ever so much, Ralph. It's been so good to speak to you again. I love that man to the very bones. Isn't he fantastic? OK, let's do a voice note before we go to break. Let's have a little listen to what Nick has to say.
Morning, Alex. It's Nick from Loughborough. I'm sorry, I'm incandescent with rage at this point. Your smug commentator, not Reem, the other lady, has just gone on about the benefits, the £9 a week that these people get, as if that's appalling. Surely a free hotel, 3 meals a day, free dental care, free health care, none of which they get in their own country, they're all benefits in their own right. The £9 a week is the icing on the cake. Where is she coming from? Honestly, these people drive me up the wall. Have a good Sunday, Alex.
Thank you, Nick. And not only that, they get free vapes as well, according to certain reports. Probably get a shirt off my back. Well, if that happens, that would be a very viral video, wouldn't it? Thank you ever so much, Nick. If you want to be like Nick and let me know your thoughts or feelings on the things we've been talking about, the numbers on the screen, 0344 499 1000 is the number to call, or the number to send a WhatsApp to, or leave a voicemail on WhatsApp. 87222 is the number if you'd like to send me a text message. Right talk before you text. We're going to take a short break. Then when we come back, we're going to be speaking to Cormac Smith, a former Ukrainian government advisor, because big news is the 28-point peace programme for Ukraine. Well, the Western world, well, much of Europe, the coalition of the willing, led, or partially led, by Sir Keir Starmer, who's always happy not to be in his own country, has said to Donald Trump, this won't do. This is capitulation. Let's find out what Cormac thinks after this.
They will never, ever change. Just like I was saying, my mother's wisdom, she used to say in Bolton they'd vote for a pig with a red ribbon on it. Well, it's like Tunbridge Wells, they vote for a pig with a blue one in it there when they swim. But I think all that's turning around. But I'll tell you what really strikes me, though, having seen that poll and gone through the numbers, is if you add up Labour, Lib Dem and the Greens, and then you've got the SNP and Plaid Cymru as well, is they still get 50. There's still half the country who think those people should rule.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello and welcome back. Let's talk now about Ukraine, because Donald Trump said, didn't he, when he came to office, I'm going to solve this in 24 hours. Well, he's not been able to. Some people would say, actually, he's been given the runaround by Putin. Well, some of his negotiators have been there trying to discuss how peace could suddenly come to pass. And he's got a 28-point proposal, which was put out yesterday. But the coalition of the willing, who have all been gathering at the G20 summit in Africa, aren't necessarily a big fan of what the peace plan has to say. Part of it talks about a reduction in the number of Ukrainian military personnel. It currently stands at 800,000, maybe 850,000. The peace proposal suggests that that should be slashed. But would that make it easier for Russia to go back and take a second bite? Because the US proposes 600,000 as the personnel cap. Also, Kiev shouldn't be allowed long-range missiles. They should stop this idea of joining NATO. And Russia should be able to keep the territory that is already taken. Let's speak to Cormac Smith, former Ukrainian government advisor. I mean, certainly, look, it's become, I think, a pragmatic viewpoint to suggest that at this point, we're, just giving Ukraine more and more and more and more missiles is not going to necessarily end the war, but perpetuate it. But at the same time, what Trump has put forward, and he has said, look, this isn't the final document, this is a starting point. It does seem to reward Vladimir Putin for his aggression.
Alex, good morning. It's always a pleasure to see you. Look, very, very briefly on your first point about giving Ukraine more and more. I've been saying for 4 years that the solution to this was to arm Ukraine to the teeth and sanction Russia back to the Stone Age. We still have not done that properly. If we had done that earlier, I think this war could have been over within 12 months in Ukraine's favour. But going back onto the main thing of this 28-point peace plan, look, details of this started leaking out around Thursday. I went out as early as Thursday and described it as the Trump-Putin so-called peace plan. On Friday, I put out a podcast where I said, and it was figuratively speaking, I said this was clearly drafted in the Kremlin and was being translated into English in the White House. One of the German newspapers of note, the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, must have been listening to me, I'd like to think, because they came out on Saturday and called it the Trump-Putin Pact. So I think what we're looking at here is this was originally being presented as a fait accompli, take it or leave it to Ukraine. And as I had predicted, there was the threat of the withdrawal of, most importantly, US military intelligence, which would be a very big problem because that's the one thing that we in Britain and Europe don't have the capacity to replace fully. I think my reading of it is the pushback from Europe, from the, as you say, the coalition of the willing, ourselves and our European friends, has been so severe that Trump's White House is rethinking it. But, I've got to say, nearly 9 years ago, when I worked for Ukraine's foreign minister, I coined the phrase, Russia lies on an industrial scale. I really don't think we're now at a point where we can trust anything which comes out of this White House, because just like the Kremlin, they also lie on an industrial scale.
So, you're sort of accusing Donald Trump of lying about what the peace plan is, or lying about what his intentions are?
Lying about what his intentions are, because I think it was very clear towards the end of the week that this was a plan that had been cooked up by Steve Witkoff and Kirill Dmitriev, and no doubt very, very closely instructed by both Trump and Putin. So I see it as a Trump-Putin plan. It was virtually everything that that Russia would wish. It would have meant accepting it, and I said that there was no way that Ukraine could or would accept it. It not only said that Russia was to keep all the land they had captured since 2024, it was importantly to give them the 25% of the Donbass or of Donetsk that they have been unable to capture in nearly 4 years. And it's very important for listeners to remember this, that this is a critical 25%. It is heavily fortified. And it was Alexander Stubb, the president of Finland, who recently described that 25% as the highway to Kyiv and indeed a gateway to the rest of Ukraine. So combine that with limiting Ukraine's military and cutting it by a factor of 2.5, I heard, and not allowing them have heavy weaponry. This was simply going to leave Ukraine as a sitting duck for when Russia decided to come back and take more, which is exactly what myself and everyone I speak to believes they will, because that's what they have said they want to do. Putin does not recognize Ukraine as a real country.
The difficulty is, it seems that we found ourselves in a bit of a stalemate. I'm minded to agree that we had all this prevarication at the outbreak of war, particularly from our continental partners, the UK much more forthright and clear about the need to help defend Ukraine. But hey-ho, we rumble on. We still haven't given enough. We've now found ourselves in a situation where, like you said, we need the American might if we're going to be able to help Ukraine push Russia back. That isn't forthcoming. There's now an increasing amount of fatigue about this, not just in America but across Europe. So what on earth can we do? It seems to me like we're stuck between a rock and a hard place, or at least President Zelensky is. Is there, do you think, progress to be made on this proposal, that we could find ourselves in a situation where we can find a resolution?
I think it's inevitable that some sort of a peace deal, which will not be ideal for Ukraine, may well be signed up to in the end, but it certainly won't be this one. Could I say something, Alex? You know, you talk about how we simply cannot do without America. We may have to do without America. And I mentioned the critical importance of America's intelligence sharing. But, you know, things have changed drastically from the start. Ukraine is now producing far more, over 60% of its full frontline armaments. It's now producing itself. Europe has stepped up massively. And if you will excuse me for a bit of jingoism as an Irishman, if America had the same commitment to Ukraine from the start that Britain showed, we would be in a very different place. It has been said, forget about Donald Trump for a moment, it has been said that Joe Biden looked at what Ukraine needed, gave them half, and gave them slowly with handcuffs on.
I've got to stop you because we've got to go to an advert break, but I totally agree with everything you say. The story's not going to end for a while, but this show is going to end in an hour, but don't go anywhere because I'm back after this.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello and welcome back to the show. It's been a joyful 2 hours, hasn't it? Sharing in the woes of the West together. And we're going to continue doing the same. Hurrah! But like I always say, it is a bit of communal catharsis. It's kind of getting together to talk about how rubbish things are, because it's better out than in. If you manage to get these things off your chest, you might be able to go and have a joyful Sunday. What have you got planned for the rest of the day? A bit of church maybe, or have you been already? Or are you going to have a roast with the relatives? Or are you, like me, going to catch up with the recording of the Formula One? We're having to do this pantomime, right, during advert breaks every single time that the news comes on and it's talking about what went on in the race. And do you know what? I kind of already know quite a bit of it. But Tech Op is, I take my earpiece out so I can't hear the headlines. I cover my eyes so I can't see what's going on the screens. I go la 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 la. And then when the reportage is over, Tech Op signals me through the glass that it's safe to listen again. So don't you dare send any single message on WhatsApp or on text about what went on in that Formula One, because that is my only way of relaxing in this woe-begotten world. OK, right, talking about the woe-begotten world, let us talk about how Britain's broken finances are only going to get worse. Hurrah! With the government borrowing. Government borrowing is ballooning ahead of the budget. Rachel Reeves under even more pressure than ever before. Let's get the view of a former Treasury Special Advisor, Cameron Brown. Cameron, thank you so much for coming on the programme. Before I taint you, as we begin the interview, saying that you were the spad to Kwasi Kwarteng, and people go, oh no, you're also the spad to Jeremy Hunt. And quite frankly, I think when we look at the state of the country today, we rather miss you guys. Let's talk about the various ways in which it's posited Rachel Reeves is going to try and fill her black hole, which seems to be a sort of smorgasbord of freezing taxation rates, of putting stealth tax on things such as gambling, all sorts of bits and bobs which she hopes are going to come together to at least buy us a couple more days before we hit financial oblivion. What would you anticipate being in the budget? Having been in the position before where you sit there and you look at the ledgers coming out of the Treasury and decide how you're going to balance the books, what sort of levers do you think she's going to reach for?
Well, she tried to reduce spending, if you remember, last year, and a number of Labour MPs put a stop to it. It was a pretty modest £5 billion cut to welfare, and even the small haircut to that budget, which is growing year on year and will continue to grow. Politically, it was very difficult for her to do so. So given she can't reduce spending, borrowing has continued to increase, she's having to return to the only lever available to her, which is further tax rises. Now, in the election, Labour promised not to increase the headline rates of income tax, VAT, national insurance. She then arguably broke that pledge last autumn by increasing national insurance. Then she said, we're not going to come back for more. And now it looks like the Chancellor's having to come back for more. So we're in this very odd kind of doom loop scenario where borrowing is increasing, inflation's increasing, spending's increasing, and so too are taxes. She's in a very, very difficult position. And it looks like in a few weeks or next week, it's going to be even more painful. And the challenge I have is she may even have to come back for more next year just to make the numbers stack up.
What would be the solution? Because I think it's a, pretty horrible, fast engulfing quicksand for anybody in the Treasury to try and contend with. Is the problem here that the Labour Party, the big sort of thing that they'd need to do is massively cut the welfare state, and that is the one type of medicine that the Labour Party just don't know how to administer?
I think that's part of it. There has to be certain limits on public spending. The other challenge, of course, is public sector productivity, which still hasn't recovered to pre-pandemic levels. So we're in this absurd situation where spending is increasing, public sector productivity is still below what it was even before the pandemic, and that's causing a massive, effectively a drag anchor on the public finances. And what we're kind of falling into this trap of just incrementally increasing taxes across the board year after year in a kind of ratcheting up situation, which means the tax burden is going to keep increasing. if we keep targeting kind of wealth and middle earners, people are going to leave the UK. And we saw that with the ONS figures last week. Around 250,000 Brits have now left the UK over the past year. And now we're seeing this kind of, as you rightly said at the beginning, this smorgasbord of smaller tax rises, these little kind of attacks on wealth and assets and pensions and savings. If you do that for so long, people are just going to get fed up and they will start, re-looking at their affairs, speaking to accountants, moving out of the country. And then that effectively increases the amount of taxes that we all have to pay to fill the gap left by those that have left. So she's in a very, very difficult position. And, if she keeps increasing taxes, this is what's going to happen.
I'm going to use the analogy of a car because I like cars. How critical a situation are we in? If we imagine we're driving a car and the petrol tank is looking pretty empty and the fuel light has just come on the dashboard, is there going to be enough that she can do to squidge in a little bit of petrol, enough to take us another 100 miles? Or how long is it until we essentially have to pull over to the lay-by and phone the AA because the car's conked out?
Well, two things are going to happen. Either Labour MPs will say enough's enough and move against the administration, or the people that lend money to the country, the so-called kind of bond markets, the money markets around the world, are going to say that's enough. Because, as we'll see next week, borrowing has to be on a sustainable footing. It isn't. It's increasing every single year. Taxes are increasing. Inflation's increasing. All of these are, as you said, warning lights in your car analogy. And at some point, something has to give. Either the domestic politics, where Labour MPs say enough's enough, we want a change of approach, or the bond markets will say, look, your plans just aren't credible. And increasing taxes, increasing spending, your inability to cut spending, your inability to look at government costs means that this government isn't working anymore, and they will likely move against the Chancellor over the coming years, as we've seen previously with other Chancellors and Prime Ministers.
Is there a risk, actually, of bringing together all of those factors, that what could happen is, because the medicine that probably needs to be given to the patient is pretty right-leaning economically, that this is going to be the thing that breaks the coherence of the Labour Party? We'll see backbenchers revolt, potentially usher in a new leader in the form of, say, Angela Rayner, who will go even more left-wing. And at that point, the bond markets are going to go, wow, you think you've got money that you just don't have. Time for you to go for the giant charity cheque from the IMF, which is never going to be big enough to plug your deficit.
Yes, well, there's the old saying, better the devil you know, is effectively the view of many of the people who lend money to the country. Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer are certainly seen as the more kind of sensible kind of politicians within the government. And if they leave, what on earth is going to replace them? But speaking to kind of Labour sources in recent weeks, they're saying, oddly enough, that the welfare bill isn't seen as a problem to be solved, which I found quite interesting, because it's a bill that is increasing year on year. It's going to keep increasing over the next 5 years. And at some point, something has to give, because, they are tens and tens of billions of pounds, £70 billion, the welfare bill is going to increase over the next few years. And rather than looking at it line by line, seeing whether there can be savings, looking at eligibility requirements, looking at the fact that long-term sick in this country is astronomically high, that is too difficult for many governments to look at, too politically painful, as you said. So what they've opted to do is just increasing taxes, but there has to be a limit to that. And I think this country has reached its so-called limit of how much tax rises it can swallow.
When we've seen crackpot economies go to pieces before, particularly following the 2008 financial crisis and then the Eurozone crisis, what we have seen is the necessity for a technocracy to essentially come in and say to countries, be they Greece or Cyprus or whatever, this is what you need to do to save your economy. It's not sustainable. Someone who's very good at reading the political runes, whether you love him or loathe him, everyone knows what my relationship has been with him in the past, i.e. I have been his right-hand woman. But if I could say one thing about Nigel Farage, it is that he seems to be very good as a portent in politics. He seems to think that what's going to happen is we'll limp through this budget. It will upset the Labour Party so much there'll be a revolt. There could be a change at the top or potentially a sort of veering to the left. The next budget will be even more catastrophic. It will collapse everything to the point that there'll be an early election because what will have happened essentially is we'd have need to call in other people to try and run our economy. Do you think that is fantasy politics, or do you think that actually looks like a potential reality?
No, I think the odds are shortening on that very scenario. It's not impossible that happens. And until there is a kind of a realization that we cannot continue on this current path, this unsustainable path of increased welfare, of increased borrowing, of increased debt, and then higher taxes to effectively keep funding your liabilities year after year, even though the Chancellor said she's not going to come back for more, she is, and it's very likely she'll have to next year as well. Something will have to give. And I think that very scenario that Nigel Farage has set out isn't too wild, given we've seen it previously where bond markets have moved against governments in the past. And given the Chancellor herself has tried, even in modest attempts, tried to reduce the welfare budget and has been rebuffed by her MPs in the Parliamentary Labour Party, the government is between a rock and a hard place. It can't cut spending, so it's had to increase taxes. And there's only so much the economy can take until revenues start reducing. Every time you increase those tax rates, as we've seen with the famous Laffer curve, the amount of revenue that you bring into the Treasury starts reducing as well. And I fear that we are now at that kind of tipping point moment.
Now, we all know what the main tactic is of the Labour Party, almost the distraction technique, which is every time people are going, well, you know, the economy is in a mess, they say it's the fault of our predecessors. And the favourite two words they like to utter are Liz and Truss. And they will say, well, look, she crashed the economy and we're having to mop up the pieces. So I have to ask you, Cameron, as the former spad to Kwesi Kwarteng, when he was Chancellor, about that moment of the mini budget and what happened in the aftermath, because I know Liz Truss very well. She's, to me, pointed the finger of blame towards the Bank of England and what they were doing just before the announcement of her mini budget. Can you walk the audience through what went on behind closed doors?
I think the diagnosis of the challenge was absolutely correct, which was Britain, very similar to where we are right now, is in a kind of a doom loop of high taxes and high borrowing and high spending. And between the two of them, they felt something radical needed to happen. Where they were wrong, of course, was you can't just borrow money permanently to fund tax cuts. And obviously, the result, of course, was the people who lend money to this country just thought it wasn't credible. And therefore, the two of them shouldn't continue. Jeremy Hunt, who I also worked for, of course, afterwards, had to effectively quickly reverse all of those measures, and the lasting damage was largely contained. But that situation shows whether you're borrowing to fund tax cuts or borrowing to fund extra spending, it's still the same outcome. If you need to limit your borrowing, limit your the amount that you're spending, and try and limit taxes as well. And that's the main lesson that we should have learned from that process.
I don't know if you've had the opportunity to look at some of the things that Nigel Farage says he would do if it was a reform government, because it'd be quite interesting to get an independent appraisal of the outline of some of these policies. There's a big analysis today in The Sun, page 14 and 15, and both Samel Stride and Nigel Farage have been asked to comment on what they would do were they running the country. And so, I mean, to give him credit, he was on the show earlier. Samel's column kind of talks about how terrible the Labour Party are and everything they're getting wrong, but doesn't go into much detail as to what he would do, although he did manage to enumerate some of those policies when we were speaking to each other on air earlier. But let's look at what Nigel Farage says Reform UK would do. He says he would slash the foreign aid budget, raising £10 billion. He says he would end universal credit payments to foreign nationals, which would save £6 billion in 1 year alone. He said he'd raise £5 billion by increasing the immigration health surcharge, which people coming into the country have to pay with their visas to cover the cost of their NHS care. And he would reform PIP payments to save another £3.5 billion. Now, if you were sitting there advising Nigel Farage, as you did do for Kwesi Kwarteng and Jeremy Hunt, would you say that kind of sounds about right, or do you see big problems in those proposals?
No, on the face of it, nothing that he set out is undeliverable, and the amount you would raise is broadly about that those figures. The issue I'm got is the challenge that we face is so much larger than those four policies. We're paying just on debt interest alone every year £100 billion just on debt interest. So that's money that goes from our taxes straight into creditors. Those policies, while welcome, we're going to need a fundamental rewiring of the way the government delivers services and the way that we allocate welfare payments, in particular on the state pension and all those kind of long-term liabilities, because it is a ticking time bomb. We have an aging population, more expensive medication, fewer people are in work, long-term sick and unemployment at record highs. We have the people that are productive in the economy is shrinking by the day and by the hour, funding a liability that's increasing by the day and by the hour. So those policies are welcome, of course, they seem plausible, but any incoming government is going to have to go even further. And the longer we're on this path, the harder those options are going to have to be.
Cameron, thank you ever so much for your candour. Cameron Brown, their former Treasury Special Advisor, saying, well, potentially there could be a temporary fix in what Nigel Farage has outlined in The Sun today, but even that isn't going to be enough. I'm just going to have to let you know, folks, that there's a really nasty person in the gallery today. There's a really cruel, mean, spiteful, unpleasant little boy by the name of Ted Jeffries. You know Ted, because I just had to glare at him through the window, because he said to me, OK, Alex, we're going to go to an advert break, but I've got some texts for you to read out first. So read out some of those texts and then do a push for calls after the break. Oh, so you know what those texts say, don't you? Yes, Sam in Barnsley, I dislike you as much as Ted. Because the one joy I have with my Sunday is going home to watch the Formula One, and I've been doing my very level best to avoid knowing what happened. Now, seriously, it's like literally the light at the end of the tunnel, the thing I've been looking forward to all weekend, right? I've recorded it. My plan was to try and avoid the result, go home, see my parents, have a roast dinner, wash it afresh so I can actually enjoy it minute by minute. But Ted thought that it'd be fun to scupper that, didn't he? So when he said, oh, we've got some texts for you to read out, and so my eyes glance at the screen, I see Sam in Barnsley telling me the result. Both of you, quite frankly, should hang your heads in disgrace, because that's just plain cruel. I think that's just nasty. I think you're really, really wicked people, because, you know, seriously, so that's my thing. And you've messed it up for me now. Thank you. Go make me a cup of tea, Ted. It's the advert break. You go make me a cup of tea. In fact, why don't you go out to a nice little cafe and get me some sort of double mocha chocolate latte thing? You little snivelling toe rag. Right, after the break, you may as well call me to discuss the Formula One. Now I know what the result is. Don't do that, because we're going to stick to current affairs. The number is 03444 99 1000. It's your normal network rate. And while Ted goes to shine my shoes, comb my hair, buy me some sort of delicious, fatty hot drink from a coffee shop. Yeah, actually a fry-up. Off you go, sunshine. Don't you look at me like that. I really don't like you right now. Cheer me up, would you? Give me a call. 03444 99 1000 is the number to dial. You can send me a WhatsApp. Yeah, why don't you tell me all about the result? Leave me a voice note. Why don't you ruin my weekend even more? 8722 is the number if you'd like to send me a text message. Right, talk before you text. Before you text. I was looking at Tech Up then, who at least is looking through the glass at me with sympathetic eyes. You, however, go. Right, I'll speak to you lovely people after this. Bye-bye.
They will never, ever change. Just like I was saying, my mother's wisdom, she used to say in Bolton they'd vote for a pig with a red ribbon on it. Well, it's like Tunbridge Wells, they vote for a pig with a blue one in it there when they sort of, but I think all that's turning around. But I'll tell you what really strikes me, though, having seen that poll and gone through the numbers, is if you add up Labour, Lib Dem and the Greens, and then you've got the SNP and Plaid Cymru as well, is they still get 50. There's still half the country who think those people should rule.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
I don't know, guys, if I'm being double bluffed at this point, because Ted says, well, whatever this message says on my screen about who won isn't actually true. So that's good. I'm hoping that he is telling the truth for once, and what I've just read is not the truth, if that makes sense to you. So I still am going to pretend I don't know what the result is. So thank you, if that is the case. We have a voice note now from a mysterious RW, and if this is the blimmin' result, if this is the result, heads are going to roll.
I think I speak for a lot of people here when I say we all think, and I definitely think, this country is run by absolute muppets. And it's as simple as that. Look at the state we're in, and they're going on about all the spending and that. We just sent £19 million to Pakistan. People need to put this country first, okay? And I've said it before, and I'm going to say it again. We need to adopt the same rules as what they use in the Middle East, because people need to come over here, if they come over here, and be scared to commit crimes. It is as simple as that. We need to be stricter.
Can I just say, I don't know what RW stands for, but I think I know which part of the country he's from. He's a West Country brethren. Yeah, do you know what? I couldn't agree more with what you said. And talking about disciplining people who commit crimes, Tony in Essex says, Alex, disgusting behaviour from Twed. Twed? Twed? That's a good nickname for you, Twig. 20 lashes at dawn. I totally agree, Tony. Yeah, he is in trouble deep. Apparently, there was a co-conspirator in this, which was the Weekend editor, Dean. But I expect that sort of disgusting behaviour from Dean. He's a vile creature. OK, let's do a few more of your messages. Alex, go back to the First and Second World Wars. America was never with us at the onset of these wars. Europe went sleepwalking into both wars, being very happy-clappy with the then existing peace and failing to maintain a strong military. Even when the other shoe dropped, we had to scramble to draft people to the army. Everything was woefully inadequate to support the woefully inadequate military of the Europeans to defend against the aggression of Hitler. If you look at history, Hitler didn't wake up one morning and decide to invade Czechoslovakia. He planned everything over many years. What makes us think Putin isn't doing the same? Mick sends me a message going, Ted sucks. I love that. Totally does. Someone needs a hug. Forgive Ted like Jesus would, for he does not know what he has done, says Andrew from Salisbury. Yeah, well, I might be able to forgive, but I ain't going to forget for a while, that's for sure. Alex, do you think Trump will appease the Chinese leader when they invade Taiwan, as he wants to do with Putin in Ukraine, asks Dave from Aylesbury. It's really strange, isn't it, how there's this sort of... It's an American obsession with whether China takes over Taiwan, which I must admit, look, I don't want China to take over Taiwan. I think China is a massive problem. Sir Keir Starmer does, and he's probably off there in January, isn't he? Going to allow him to build a super embassy. He loves a bit of Xi Jinping. Most of our people in government haven't they? Successive governments seem to be cozying up to China, but America are always a bit more tough. But they seem to understand the threat of China in America, but they don't really get it when it comes to Putin. And Davy Reese says, I totally agree with Cormac Smith. I wouldn't believe a word that comes out of the idiots in the White House. Sick Yanks. Do you know, I actually like Trump, by and large. And I think in many respects, some of his foreign policy has been utterly genius. But when it comes to this Ukraine thing, oh, doesn't make me feel comfortable. Let's listen to this voice note now from Fiona.
Hi, Alex. This is Fiona calling from the Isle of Wight. Now, I totally agree with you about the Formula One. I, too, have made great efforts not to find out what the result was. I've turned off the news every half hour and on the hour, and thought I was doing quite well until I thought, I'll just have a look at the Telegraph. And lo and behold, it didn't tell me what the result was, but it told me about something that had happened afterwards. So I'm not very happy either. Good show. Bye-bye.
I feel you, Fiona. It's like walking through a minefield on a Sunday. If you're not watching the Formula One live, it's like, don't look at that screen. Don't read that text message. Don't work with Ted. And I'm sorry if our bulletins, I'm able, because I know when the bulletins are coming, to pull out the earpiece and drown them out and go la, 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 to not hear the results. But I'm afraid that we're also doing our level best to ruin it for you. It was, however, when I said that there was a text saying who had won, which Ted says me wasn't the truth anyway, I didn't actually say it, did I? So, you know, there you go. I'm working with you, Fiona. We're doing our best. OK, we're going to take a short break now, but when I come back... Oh, this is a topic I've been looking forward to. This is a brilliant one. When we come back, I'm going to be talking with a brilliant journalist, Christopher Sharp, who's the founder and editor-in-chief of the Liberation Times and a senior contributing journalist at the Daily Mail, about a programme on Amazon called The Age of Disclosure. And it's about the bipartisan congressional hearings that have been happening in America with whistleblowers from the US military, from the CIA, from the government, brilliant contributors from Barack Obama to Marco Rubio, talking about whether humans are the only life forms in this universe, or indeed whether or not we've got characters from far-flung galaxies already with us here on Earth. I know it sounds crazy, but it's worth talking about. That's coming up after this.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Right, hello there. Now, I've been looking forward to doing this segment all show because it's something that doesn't really get into the press much in the United Kingdom. And I know it's going to sound a bit balmy. And I know it's going to sound a bit bonkers, but that is the weirdness of this whole topic. Because what we have seen over in the United States are very senior whistleblowers. And we're not talking about crackpots, conspiracy theorists and lunatics, but very serious whistleblowers coming from the US military, coming from the CIA, coming from the Senate and Congress, and swearing on oath about whether or not, and wait for this, whether or not aliens or UAPs or UFOs as they used to be called are with us. I know, it sounds crazy, but a programme has just dropped on Amazon and I watched it yesterday. Have we got the trailer for that? Indeed we do. So let me show you what I was watching just last night.
The American people are ready to receive the truth.
Humanity is not the only intelligence in the universe.
Humanity is not the only intelligent species.
We are absolutely not alone. Non-human intelligence exists.
UAPs are real, they're here, and they're not human.
Wow. When I said to Ted I was doing this, Ted was like, oh, God, aliens, Alex, really? But I'm not losing my mind, am I, Christopher Sharp? Because what we have seen taking place in America is indisputably revelations or disclosure on the fact that for a long time now, whether it be in the private sector with defence corporations or the US military, for a long time there's suggestions that there have been investigations into particularly certain crafts that seem to defy the laws of physics as we know it. Christopher, can you fill us in? Because it's a huge topic, and I don't really know where to begin myself.
Hi, Alex. Thank you so much for having me on. Yes, you've got military and intelligence personnel in the USA, people entrusted with the highest clearances to keep the secrets of America and to keep everyone safe. Who are alleging that there are non-human beings piloting things that we know as UAP, which is unidentified anomalous phenomena, which used to be called UFOs. So we're in a situation where either all these senior people that keep, America and the West in general safe, and entrusted with the highest clearances, either they've all gone crazy, or they're telling the truth. Either way, it is a global security issue, which I think we should take very, very seriously.
I mean, someone said to me yesterday, look, if this is true, why is it not on the front page of every single newspaper? Because I agree with you. These are very, very senior figures. We're not talking about, some sort of a person with crazy hair and ethnic jewellery doing some programme for Discovery. We are talking about people swearing on oath, appearing in front of Congress. We're talking about people who've worked on what are called these recovery programmes and said, I myself went and saw some of these crafts. In the documentary, there is also people saying, I myself have seen what is called biologics, life forms, which aren't human. I mean, this is so massive in my mind. Is it because the whole world has been sort of conditioned to think that this is crackpot, that it's become such a stigma to talk about it, that you could literally have Donald Trump standing behind a podium saying we're not alone in the universe and people go, well, he's lost his marbles? Is it that potentially there's some sort of distraction technique and conspiracy that we're being fed this information because actually there are sort of advanced weapons programs being done by America and they're trying to cover that up? Or is it that just this is true?
Yeah, so the allegation is that there has been a very sophisticated disinformation program running back decades, ever since the 1940s, so that there is a stigma associated with this topic. Because if you think about it, we should be taking it seriously. If there's something unidentified in our skies over the most sensitive nuclear military sites, we should be asking what they are, especially if they show sophisticated technology, whether they be Russian, Chinese, or maybe something else. We should be asking those questions. So the fact stories like this do not make the front page of the news is astonishing to me. I mean, last year we had a basically lockdown over RAF Lakenheath in the UK and other sensitive UK military facilities because there were drones over the airspace, and no one could take them down, no one could detect them, and no one could see where they were coming from. The special forces in the UK used the most sophisticated anti-drone equipment that they could use, and still nothing was bringing them down. So, I mean, there were 2 Cobra meetings as well about these incidents. And again, it didn't make the front page of the news. So I think there is just such a stigma attached to this topic. People scared about looking silly. They're more scared about looking silly than they are about kind of like national security issues, which is really, really sad. But yeah, I mean, you've got the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, in that documentary as well, basically stating that advanced unknown craft were above sensitive nuclear facilities in the USA, and they don't know where they come from. So I think this is stuff that we need to take seriously, because we've got people who work in special access programs and controlled access programs in the US who basically are claiming that they are non-human in origin in many of these incidents, basically, and that sometimes they are downed and sometimes they crash, and they find the occupants on board and they're non-human. So again, we're talking about people in very, very senior positions alleging this. We're not talking about your wacko down the road or anything like that. So this is stuff you have to take it seriously, I think.
No, I agree. Let's talk about some of these phenomena, because this isn't new. There might have been an uptick, let's say, in the last sort of 2 decades or so, but stories of there being, let's say, orbs, that's the sort of description that is often used to discuss things that we have been observing at least since the Second World War.
Yeah, so orbs are being so this is the thing, because a lot of people are saying, you know, these could be Russian or Chinese, but I mean these are being seen for decades now. I mean, look at Rendlesham Forest in the UK that happened in the early 1980s. There was a UFO spotted there, and it was seen by senior US military personnel, and there was a big reaction from Margaret Thatcher's government at the time as well, because it was a serious security incident. So I mean, these have been going back decades now, and the allegation is that what basically happens is that if you're America or if you're the UK, you have retrieval programs. So if something Russian crashes in the channel or something like that, you're going to retrieve it. And there are special programs where you've got intelligence personnel, military personnel, kind of working to get those materials retrieved. And if they're advanced, then they'll try to reverse engineer it. The allegation is that America has such programs, which is correct, I think. And sometimes what will happen is that very advanced things of unknown origin will crash, and the people who are working on these programs are just less astonished. And sometimes they see beings and they're like, well, these aren't human, like what's going on here? And then what happens are these craft get sent to military contractors like Lockheed Martin and Raytheon. So this is what happens, and it's orchestrated by the CIA's Directorate of Science and Technology. And I mean, its previous directors like Glenn Gaffney, Stephanie O'Sullivan, people like that are the people kind of like involved orchestrating it. So it's kind of like, in our world, you know, we always think that it's the president or it's the prime minister involved, but what we're talking about is you know, a bureaucratic situation here where elected officials are not being read into what's happening. Unfortunately, it's like the deep state has taken over.
I'm obsessed with this topic, as you well know. We often have a sort of sidebar on WhatsApp discussing it, and I don't think it's conspiracy theory, and I don't think it's crazy, although a lot of people out there are conditioned to believe it is. But certainly, for instance, in the Second World War, fighter pilots reported the existence of these entities, these sort of round spherical type things, which seemed to move without any known propulsion. They didn't sort of take a long time to turn a corner. They would be able to sort of dart around on whatever axis they wish. They'd be able to hover. They seem to be able to move at ridiculous speeds, thousands and thousands of miles per hour. And they used to come and buzz fighter pilots during the Second World War. So common were they that they actually were given a nickname, Foo Fighters. And that this phenomena has been recorded time and again. We now have equipment within aerospace technology that this now is backed up by these things being recorded on radar. So why is it, do you think, that if this is a phenomena that is relatively regular, or not just regular, but it has been recorded for a period of decades and decades now, why is it that people like me haven't looked out their window and seen these things?
Going on every day, and what I would say is that they seem to be most interested in the most kind of like sensitive military sites more than anything. Every day out on the East Coast, the US has a training range where its naval aviators will train off the coast of the East Coast. And they're basically seen on a daily basis there. The fighters, the naval aviators will report the incidents, and basically it works its way up to the top of the chain, and nothing ever gets done. And this is happening on a daily basis, that these things are being seen, and no one's getting any answers where they're coming from. And we know that the US has some very sophisticated tracking technology, whether it be underseas or in space or in the Earth's atmosphere, because these things are transmedium, that they're seen undersea, they're seen in our atmosphere, in the air, and they're seen in space as well. So they're being seen everywhere. And I mean, this actually goes back allegedly to 1933. David Grush, one of the top whistleblowers who actually was involved in briefing the president of the USA in his daily intelligence briefings, who had access to some of the most sensitive secrets in the US, alleged that this goes back to 1933 and a craft actually crashed in a place called Magenta in Italy, and that it was covered up by the Mussolini government. And I mean, this was conspiracy for a long time, but then you had David Grush speak about it. And then at the Daily Mail, we had someone from that region whose grandfather was the mayor of an area near where the alleged crash happened. And he basically said that that story had been repeated by a lot of the local people around the area. So there does seem something to this, and it goes back decades.
One of the reasons it's sort of suggested in the brilliant programme on Amazon is that the cover-up is largely down to security. The big concern, as far as I understand it, and this is something that Marco Rubio was very expressly saying as a contributor to this particular programme, is that for a long time now, various governments have been finding certain crafts or UAPs and trying to reverse engineer their technology, saying, right, we don't have this technology, what is it? We can't tell anyone else, because heaven forfend, if China figured out the propulsion systems of these vehicles, if Russia managed to take this technology and claim it as their own because they've managed to scientifically figure out before we do, then they will have a huge upper hand, a massive advantage over us. And so this is why there's so many sort of, smoke and mirrors about all of this. It's even got to the stage where allegedly the whistleblowers are saying that people are so afraid to come forward who work on these programs because their lives may be at risk. They might find themselves not just discredited and disgraced, but potentially bumped off if they disclose some of the things that they know about.
Correct. There's allegedly been murders connected to this, and a lot of people who are working on these programs, they basically rely on their security clearances for a living to actually put money on the table for their and put food on the table for their families. And what will usually happen, from my understanding, is that if anyone speaks to the intelligence community's inspector general, which is the right pathway to actually become a whistleblower about this topic, they'll suddenly find themselves under investigation for something unconnected, and they'll have their security clearances taken away, and sooner or later they'll find themselves at the job, and then all of a sudden no one's going to take them on because no one trusts them anymore. So that's what's happening. A lot of people are scared about that, and they're scared for their lives. I know that congressional staff are being threatened over this as well. And you're right, there does allegedly seem to be an arms race related to this. This is the Manhattan Project in steroids, basically. And whoever manages to master this technology first basically dominates the world, and that is the allegation. And I think we owe it to ourselves as journalists to actually take it seriously, especially when it is coming from people who are in very, very high positions and we trust with our national security. So I think it's really, really, really worthwhile looking into this.
Yeah, and I want to reiterate, actually, if people watch that programme, they will see that Barack Obama's interview, that Marco Rubio's interview, we're talking about Democrats and Republicans, we're talking about very senior military officials, not just weirdos who, I don't know, like the idea of aliens and UFOs. But for a long time, there'd been pressure on Donald Trump to finally disclose the so-called UFO files. It seems to me that there's a timing going on right now that rather than do this, there's a big push to publish all of the Epstein files instead. People who have been part of producing this programme on Amazon are hoping that it might nudge the president into potentially being the very first world leader to stand behind a pulpit, if you will, a lectern, and say to the whole of humanity, here's the evidence, we are not alone. Do you think Donald Trump might do that?
I hope he does. I don't know what pressures he's under, but we're talking about really, really serious people here who will not bat an eyelid to actually bump someone off when it comes to this. I don't think presidents are immune to that. I really don't think they are, because again, you know, this is the Manhattan Project on steroids, and I believe some crimes have been committed as well going back. So I think if you are going to get this information out, you also need amnesty as well, so that we can actually press ahead with this, because the fear is that China and Russia are able to get the edge on this because they're able to keep secrets better. They could work. They could throw more people at this, basically. Whereas in America, it's so compartmentalized, and no one seems to be making as much progress anymore. So the fear is that America's going to get overtaken, China's going to overtake them, and basically China was going to dominate for the next 1,000 years or something like that. That's the fear from people that I speak to. I hope he does actually go ahead with disclosure. I mean, this is bipartisan, as you said. You know, you've even got AOC, you've got Chuck Schumer in the Senate basically for sponsoring a bill to actually provide transparency on this topic. And we're hoping that it goes through the House and the Senate and passes through as a law this year. But at the moment, we're not seeing any support from the White House, unfortunately. And the White House, the Republicans control the House and the Senate. If Trump wanted to disclose this, he could easily nod through that bill. So that's what we're looking for. We're looking for any sign, basically, that the White House will go ahead of it. We know that J.D. Vance is interested in the topic. He's spoken about it publicly before. We know that Rubio is. We know that the Director of National Intelligence is as well. So we're just hoping that there will be this push and that they will go ahead of it. But as I said, we don't know what pressures there are, because I do hear that people are being threatened.
It's a really astonishing topic. Christopher Sharp, thank you ever so much. Do you know, guys, there'll be, I think, you know, the audience are going to fall into two categories here. Either people who go, yeah, ha ha,
take care,
it's all a conspiracy, it's all a nonsense, Alex has clearly lost her marbles, and clearly that Christopher Sharp's a nutcase as well, or this is all being used to distract us because of other matters. Or there might be people listening saying, do you know, I think it's perfectly viable. There probably has been a cover-up. But what a massive thing. At some point, it may well come to pass that we are told that human beings are not alone. Look, I believe it. I do. I genuinely believe it. But I would recommend, if you're interested in the topic at least, The Age of Disclosure on Amazon is utterly, utterly superb. And hey, whether you believe it or not, it's certainly fascinating. OK, we're going to take a short break now, but when I come back, more of your messages and voice notes. So 0344 499 1000 is the number if you want to get in one final call. I'm back after this.
They will never, ever change. Just like I was saying, my mother's wisdom, she used to say in Bolton they'd vote for a pig with a red ribbon on it. Well, it's like Tunbridge Wells, they vote for a pig with a blue one in it there when they swim. But I think all that's turning around. But I'll tell you what really strikes me, though, having seen that poll and gone through the numbers, is if you add up Labour, Lib Dem and the Greens, and then you've got the SNP and Plaid Cymru as well, is they still get 50. There's still half the country who think those people should rule.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube. on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello there and welcome back to the show. Now, earlier on, I was interviewing the Shadow Chancellor, Mel Stride, all about the state of the economy. This is what he had to say. Welcome to the show, Mel. Fantastic having you on this morning, especially on a Sunday. Let's talk about what the Chancellor is potentially going to do. We had Avni there from the IPPR saying, look, they do need to do something about the welfare state. It's not a quick and easy solution. But now the Chancellor is suggesting, it seems, that she wants to scrap the two-child benefit cap. What do you think about that?
I think that's the wrong decision. I think it's the wrong decision because it's going to put up the welfare bill, not reduce it, and put it up by about £3.5 billion. And I think there is an element of fairness to the taxpayer here. Those who are not on benefits, when they consider whether they're going to have a particularly large family, have to take tough decisions as to whether they can afford to have a larger family. And yet, under the proposals that we think the Chancellor is going to come forward with, it'll be a case that families on benefit can have as many children as they like, supported by taxpayers, without having to take those kind of tough decisions, and I don't think that's fair.
We know that the welfare state is enormous. We know that there's an increasing problem with worklessness, particularly under in the sort of lower age demographic. And yet it seems to me what the Labour Party are proposing is a loosening up on things like, well, we're not going to pay your benefits if you're not actively seeking work. There's supposed changes here. Instead, looking at a benefit for task force, which could save £1.2 billion. We know that there's been the sort of bones of a welfare reform put to the Labour Party before, and it's been rejected. If you weren't Shadow Chancellor, but Chancellor, what would you be doing?
I'd be getting on top of the welfare budget, and you're right to highlight the fact that, of course, they've tried to do that, couldn't get it through their back benches, so I think they're in a very weak position. But you've got to get on top of the welfare budget, and more broadly across government. At our conference, I set out £47 billion worth of savings, and then you have to use those savings to both bear down on the size of the deficit, because we're spending far too much on debt interest at the moment. We've got to get that under control. But secondly, we've got to then look at getting down taxes, particularly in areas of the economy that in turn will drive growth, wealth creation, job creation, and in time, of course, more taxes to spend on our public services.
There'll be people listening to this saying, well, that's all very well, but how did the welfare state get so big in the first place? And people will think back to the Conservatives and think, well, you were in power for 14 years and a lot of this bloating happened under your watch.
Well, we did a huge amount, Alex, to get people into employment. In fact, under the last Conservative government, if you go back to 2010, we created 4 million more jobs as a consequence of the way our stewardship of the economy and so on. And I was actually Secretary of State for Work and Pensions at the tail end of our time in office, so we had already brought through changes and reforms to the work capability assessment. That's the gateway onto these longer-term health and sickness benefits, and the OBR had said and scored that would lead to about 450,000 fewer people going on to those benefits. So we were already beginning to arrest
Let's dig into that.
rise,
What sort of changes?
The government scrapped it.
Yeah, what sort of changes were you putting in place? Are we talking about things such as not being able to receive benefits if you have a mental health condition?
Yeah, we looked at the work capability assessment, which is the gateway onto those longer-term health and disability benefits, and we tightened that gateway up, particularly around the area of less severe, shall I say, mental health conditions like anxiety, mild depression, ADHD and so on, in a way that would have led, as the OBR said, to almost 500,000 fewer people going onto those benefits. Now, the problem is that one of the first things that this government did when it got into office was to scrap all that, come forward with their own botched proposals, which were all hastily scrabbled together at the last minute when they needed to find some savings, and they couldn't get it past their backbenchers. We also were consulting, to your question, on personal independence payments and how we were going to reform those. That was interrupted by the general election, and we went into the last general election with a clear plan for a further £12 billion worth of savings. So these things can be done. They have to be done in a measured and thoughtful way, because you are dealing with millions of people, and in some cases cases, highly vulnerable people. You have to get it right, but you have to do the work, and you have to have the plan, and you have to have the strength as a government to actually bring these reforms through. And we see no evidence, I'm afraid, of any of that from this Labour government.
Now, it's interesting. I've got the Sun open today because on page 15 we're talking in the Sun about what the Chancellor might be proposing to do when it comes to the forthcoming budget, and you've got a piece in there, and so has Nigel Farage. So I want to sort of read out to you what he has to say to see how much you might agree with his policy, because they seem to be running away when it comes to the polls at the moment. He's saying that he would slash foreign aid, basically cut it by 10 billion. He says he'll end universal credit payments for foreign nationals, saving 6 billion. He would raise 5 billion, increasing the immigration health surcharge, and reform PIP disability payments to save another 3.5 billion. He seems to have sat there with a magic calculator and done some sums which he thinks would close the deficit black hole. Do you agree with his policies?
Well, he's certainly copying some of the things, the announcements we've already made around, for example, welfare payments to foreign nationals, although in typical reform style, when they first rushed out with the policy, they vociferously maintained that they would be including EU nationals within that, and then they seem to have backed off somewhat from that position. But what Mr Farage has not said in his article, of course, is that reform's policy is to scrap the two-child benefit cap. So they're in line with the Labour Party. They want to spend more on benefits in that way, and that is not the best way of reviving our economy, I'm afraid.
And then, well, there you go. That was Mel Strider outlining what he might want to do if he were Chancellor, although I'm not sure how many people trust the Conservative Party, analysing what Nigel Farage says he has to do. The big news, of course, next week is going to be the budget, and I have a feeling it is not going to be particularly happy. I'm going to be with you, actually, next week. I'm going to be presenting Drive, so that's from 4 p.m. till 7 p.m, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and